republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for being here. Tonight we're starting with a public hearing. Our first item on the agenda is a public hearing. We'll then close the public hearing and move into our regular Board of Selectmen meeting. So the purpose of this part of our agenda is to speak to the proposed amendments to the Simsbury Code of Ordinances, Chapter 133, concerning the storage, collection, and disposal of recyclable materials. So at this point, I'll ask the board for a motion to open the public hearing.
Move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. At this time, we'll open to the public. Any comments on the proposed ordinance? If you'd like to speak to it, just raise your hand. Yes.
First of all, I don't know what's old and what's new, because nothing was italicized. So as far as I can see, this is brand new to me. I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
First of all, on 133-16, as far as how you go about doing this recycling, I don't know if this is new or old, but it seems like you're putting an undue burden on the people who are recycling by going through 5 different ways of doing things before you can even place it in the recycle bin. So that seems to be a little difficult for people if you want them to recycle, to tell them to do all these things. Secondly, I'm concerned about number C here, which says that the multi-work center who brings such items to the recycle shall pay such applicable fee as is set forth in this article. Do the people who bring the recyclables to the, is there a change now to the town recycling center, do they pay a fee for bringing all this glass and newspapers and corrugated cardboard and all this other stuff, plastic and all this other things? Do they now pay? Because as you know, the town dump or the recycling place was supposed to be set aside for the poor of Simsbury. It's part of the trust. And it hasn't been used as such, but all the recyclables are supposed to be free for the people, and the other prices are ridiculous. But if everybody would go back to the historical perspective, it should all be for the poor of Simsbury, for the people, and we shouldn't have these outlandish prices for everything that you have to put in the area. So I just would like those 2 things to be reviewed so that you can adhere to the trust as much as possible. That's me.
Anyone else on the proposed ordinance? Yes, sir.
I think when the ordinances were drawn up, there was little or no attention to the more or less the people that are condominium owners, people that are tenants in the various rental apartments. I don't know what is done with the town as far as the Eno Place and Murphy, the town-run housing. I don't know what's being done there, but I noticed that the last time around there was talk, well, they were going to come up with a system where at the end of the year or semi-annually, people would be more or less given what was made on whatever they turned in. In other words, I'm certain who's ever doing the recycling in town, when he turns all that material over to whoever he's turning it over, they pay him for it. He doesn't give it out of the goodness of his heart. And in turn, where does the money go once it gets to him? Is it redistributed to the homeowners? Fine. But what about the people that are condominium dwellers and the tenants that are dwellers? How are they redistributed? Because in most cases, they're not given bins or anything. They're just barrels that are put up, and the barrels are just out there, and I think they're all pushed together. Newspapers, cans and whatever. And here again, going back to my Boy Scout days in the old days, during the war, we collected newspapers for the war effort. And we used to give all that to the recycling people. They in turn turned it over to whoever they turned it over to, and they were paid for it. And what I'm saying is, I hear a lot about people are going to be remunerated, yet I haven't seen the remuneration.
Thank you. And if I could just have your name for the record. Councilman, if I could have your name for the record.
Robert Kalishman,
Oh, I'm Joan Coe.
971 Hut Meadow Street, Simsbury, Connecticut.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just so the clerk has a record.
May I speak on another subject?
When we close this hearing, we'll open it up to any comments. So we just want to have speakers only on this topic because that's the purpose of this public hearing. Anyone else who'd like to speak to the recycling? Okay. If not, we'll address the questions that were raised when we get to the discussion portion of, oh, we have one more taker. Okay.
Are we just speaking from
Just speaking,
our seats?
wherever you like. You're welcome
Okay,
to come up.
got it. Actually, still was putting some notes together heading over here, so I might have to do a little bit of looking around at some of my other pieces here.
And we just need your name for the record.
Lori Fernand, and I live at 15 Camille Lane in West Simsbury. And I want to say good evening to First Selectman Glassman and other members of the board. And definitely, I'm really happy to be here speaking about this ordinance this evening. And I was thinking about it, and this really, to me, is, since we had single stream barrels put in place, this is the next biggest step we can make in order to really increase our recycling rates here in Simsbury. And in looking to institute a reliable recycling system which provides a return to the town while also increasing recycling rates, the Public Works Department has assessed available options, the result of which requires the proposed changes to this recycling ordinance. The proposal before us would allow the town to contract with both All Waste and Pains to conduct curbside collection of recyclables. And from what I understand, at this point, both collectors have agreed in principle to provide a rebate of $10 per ton on these recyclables. For the past many years, it's been $5 per ton that we've been getting back. So this is a substantial increase in funds. According to the ordinance, the agreements will be renewed annually. So if we do discover that for some reason recyclables all of a sudden start bringing in $100 a ton, we can then go back and talk to both All Waste and Pains to see about renegotiating an increase in the amounts. The advantages to this include both Pains and All Waste have been serving our communities reliably for some time. In the last several years that I've been on the recycling committee, I've never received a complaint regarding either one of these collectors. This also provides incentive for Pains and All Waste to increase their recycling rates because they're going to be, they have an opportunity now to bring the recyclables to an approved recycling facility that can give them their greatest return. So it gives them incentive to go and have more recyclables recycled, and then we're getting more funds on top of that. And with the rebate funds, the recycling committee would be able to launch a comprehensive recycling awareness campaign for residents, schools, and businesses. And that's one thing I want to ask this evening, because we're looking at a substantial increase in the rebate that we'd be receiving. What we've been missing is really having a comprehensive awareness campaign on why recycling is good. It's not just warm fuzzies. We're not just recycling because it sounds good. We're recycling because it really helps our bottom line. And we could go out there with this next year. I would respectfully request that we could receive 50% of that for the recycling committee to go and really conduct this awareness campaign. And I was looking into things like doing a town-wide mailing. I don't know if people have seen this. This is the brochure for the Simsbury Bulky Waste and Recycling Center. This is pre-2001. And anyone, I know Mike Pains, and if there's an All Waste representative here today, can say that recycling's come a long way since then. So we really need to get materials such as this updated. If we did a town-wide mailing, what would be great is if we could include a sticker that people could put on their recycling bin with updated information on what you can now recycle. That's changed dramatically also. So there's a number of ways. We could get banners across Hot Meadow. We could get banners at the school during November when we have National Recycling Awareness Day. So there's just an awful lot we could do with these additional funds. The remaining 50%, I would then also respectfully request that that be used to assist with the cost for our hazardous waste collection now. Since we are taking on more responsibility in that regard as a town, it would be great if those funds could help offset the costs there. And although we did talk about this at our June meeting with the recycling committee, we didn't have a quorum, so we didn't vote on this, but we've been talking about this as a committee for the last several months. And we have been unanimous in supporting this ordinance going forward, and also in the desire to have a piece of this be something that we can use for this next year to increase our awareness. And then next year, when we're renegotiating, once again, we can come back and talk about what's realistic for the year after, because I don't think that 50% request is something we'll need in perpetuity, but for this next year, it would be great. Right,
Thank
so
you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak on the recycling ordinance? Okay, going once, going twice? Okay. Can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The public hearing is now closed. Thank you all for your comments. We will have an opportunity for Tom Roy to address some of the comments and questions and as we get to the action item on our agenda. I'd ask you all now to rise as we stand for Pledge of Allegiance for our regular meeting. So if you don't mind, we're going to do this right from the beginning. I pledge allegiance. Oh, let me just ask Ryan, our Eagle Scout, to come on up and lead us, since we don't often have an Eagle Scout with us. So if you don't mind, Ryan. Thank you very much. Come on right up. Okay, wait for your cue.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very, very nice. Thank you very much. Before we begin our public audience, I'd ask everyone to join me in a moment of silence for the loss of Jewel Gutman. We lost both Jack Bannon, who was very active in our community, and now Jewel Gutman, and we're very sorry for the loss to her family. Jewel, as many of you know, served as chair of the Board of Ed on the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, the School Finance Commission, Capital Region Education Council, the Board of Ethics, the Civitan Club, in the Farmington Valley, and the Simsbury Community Television. She chaired the Charter Revision Commission, was president of the Simsbury Chamber, was initially involved in the establishment of the ABC House, one of Simsbury's hometown heroes, and at the time of her death, she was a board member of the Simsbury Main Street Partnership. So for all of her hard work, she will be sorely missed, and really was a very important part of our community. So I ask you to join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. We'll now open up the board meeting to public audience. Is there anyone who'd like to address the board? Yes.
2655. I recently received a letter from Town Attorney Bob DiCrescenzo explaining why the Board of Selectmen have chosen to give several politically connected people in the first place on the agenda instead of public audience, under the guise that they have had time restraints and would like to have preferential treatment. DiCrescenzo's interpretation of my lawsuit was that public audience had to be placed in the beginning of the agenda, not the first place. I guess when public audience is placed at the end of the meeting, DiCrescenzo will interpret the meaning of beginning and state that beginning lasts until the end. This is the town attorney's interpretation of semantics and law to the convenience of the first selectman. The items on the agenda are usually placed at the direction of the first selectman. Is the town in contempt of court? At the last meeting, first placement on the agenda was given to presentations. An Aging and Disability Award was presented. Bob Hensley gave an update on performing arts because he was going out of town. He requested and was given preferential treatment. The community farm that is inconsistent with the Eno Trust on town land for the poor of Simsbury also received double billing with an early presentation and a later agenda item. With all this praise afforded the community farm, First Selectman Mary Glassman not once stated that she is on the board of directors of Billings Forge, an organization that farms the Simsbury Community Farm. They too had preferential treatment. During the community farm presentation, there was discussion of a merger with Gifts of Love and Avon. Has this merger been approved by the town, by the Attorney General's office in keeping with the Eno Trust for the Poor of Simsbury? It appears that the taxpayers who support the government are barely tolerated and do not deserve to be heard at the beginning of the agenda with their concerns. All the people serving on the board are representing all of the people in Simsbury, not just politically active individuals who get top billing. Listening to the public should be foremost in a democratic society. Recently, there was an article in the newspaper discussing performing arts concerts. The reporter mentioned the fact that a resident of POW Hero wanted to sit outside the perimeter of the concert and was told that the concert with the symphony gave away all the land in close proximity to the concert to the symphony, and he was not allowed on the premises without a ticket. How can the town give away tax-funded land and free airwaves to a promoter? Many towns have free concerts at their parks. Why is Simsbury so restrictive? It appears that the Emmylou concert did not have the projected attendance and ticket sales were lacking, so they reduced their prices. The prices for the concert tickets were reduced up to 60%. The group on coupon noted that lawn tickets valued at $37.45 were selling for $15, and a reduction of 60% on the reserved orchestra seats, selling for $52.80, were selling for $23, a reduction of 56%. Before the Peter Frampton concert was canceled, there were discounts up to 40% off the ticket sales, and it appears that the ticket sales were lacking, leading to the cancellation. Did the PAC and the Board of Selectmen give permission to reduce ticket prices? Do these reductions in tickets price devalue the entire concert series? Now, with Peter Frampton concert canceled, it is time to take the consultant's report seriously and stop wasting our time and energy trying to be Tanglewood and use the facility as a recreational venue under the direction of the Recreation Department. The old cliche, build it and they will come, does not hold true for the Performing Arts Center. It is time to reevaluate the direction of this facility. Having a 501c3 organization taking over management of the performing arts will not address the inherent issue that Simsbury is not Tanglewood. The taxpayers of Simsbury should not have their land taken over by a nonprofit organization. According to the PAC minutes of July 25th, the symphony owes the town $16,900 and the town portion of ticket sales. How can the town renew a contract with an organization that is deficient on their payments? On Sunday, July 28th, I drove past the area of the bicycle sculpture in the commuter parking lot and saw a table with promotional material for the Greenway, a banner on the property, and a trailer with Greenway promotional pictures on the trailer parked at the commuter parking lot. I also saw Steve Mitchell on his bike waving to me as I passed. All of this activity was illegal since there was no permission given from the town to the state. Why is Steve Mitchell so special that he has not and does not adhere to the permitting process? Is Steve Mitchell above the law? Why has the town allowed him to continually violate zoning laws of our town without any disciplinary action? This photo of the trails behind Hazel Meadow development shows permanent structures to slow bicycle traffic, but in fact it appears to add enormous risk to the people using the trail. Recently, there was an accident at MDC Reservoir where a bicyclist was hurt by plowing into a permanent structure and received over $2 million in an injury settlement. These structures not only impede traffic, but are dangerous to negotiate and places the town and the people using the trail at great risk. This is an engineering nightmare. As Kerma, the town's risk insurer, been notified of these permanent structures and the risks associated with it. It appears in the Department of Health's first quarterly regulatory action report that the elite Ethel Walker School received a notification of noncompliance. The violation was failure to satisfy regulatory requirements related to the management of asbestos-containing materials in the school. Has this failure to comply placed any of the residents of the school at risk? According to town records, the town is delinquent on its IRS filings. Was there a fine associated with the delinquent payment? Now the Board of Selectmen is in election mode with Nancy Hasse running against First Selectman Mary Glassman. I would like to know why we the people should vote for her, since Nancy Hasse has not contributed any new ideas during her tenure to the board. What differentiates Nancy Hasse from Mary Glassman? Nancy Hasse has remained silent on all issues, so why change? Nancy Hasse will continue having Tom Cook as our pseudo-town manager because she is against giving the people the right to choose their form of government. What record does Nancy Hasse have during her tenure on the Board of Selectmen that distinguishes hers from the present First Selectman?
You
We
can
the
summarize,
people
Mrs.
don't need platforms with many generalities. We the people need professional management to guide us through a dismal economic future and a greatly reduced grand list. Neither of these candidates is willing to change our form of government to a professional town manager. Given the choice, why change? We lose with both candidates. And all of my comments will be posted on Simsbury.com and Simsbury Pack. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Robert Kalishman, Simsbury, Connecticut. I'd like to start this evening with paying my condolences to the Gutman family. The thing here is, I like to thank the first select woman for her courtesy and thankfulness to the veterans of the Korean War. As most of us know, that the armistice was signed on the 27th of July, concluding the Korean conflict. And many of my comrades refer it to as the Forgotten War. We came back, we didn't have any parades. It took 50 years to build a monument, and we have one now in Washington, D.C., and we went to work. That was it. We didn't have any advocates. We didn't have anybody parading. We didn't have anybody throwing their medals over their shoulder. We didn't have any of that, and we didn't. And most of my comrades referred to as the Forgotten War. So thank you very much for Select Women for not forgetting the Korean veterans and the Korean people that we took out from underneath the heel of tyranny. The next thing I'd like to go into is the fact that veterans, people owe so much, in my opinion, but give so little. Good example is a survivor of the death camps, the Japanese death camps, a prisoner of war taken on Corregidor, that stayed under the Japanese until after the surrender, which is coming up in September. And here he goes down on the 4th of July to view a patriotic concert, and he's threatened with arrest. Is that how we handle our people? If it wasn't for the wisdom of the chief of police of Simsbury, the veterans would have to go down and take a collection to bail out Mr. Crowley, to get him out of jail. Because I'm certain that one of you on the board would do it. That's my feeling. Now, speaking of that and of veterans, I was surfing the other day on the television, and I came across Channel 5, and they were having a hearing on the zoning down here regarding horses and stables and whatever. And I watched it with great interest, and then my interest turned to concern. That wasn't a hearing down there. That was a mob. That was a mob. And what topped it off for me and for all veterans is Mr. Mitchell, Steve Mitchell, right, who's getting all of these fringes from the town. He gets up and he starts his address as, I didn't move here, I was born here. And the chairman of that zoning commission, Mr. Pomeroy, he didn't ask him what he meant by that remark. I felt offended by it. And the first selectwoman should feel offended by it. She wasn't born here. And I won't call the roll of the board, but I venture there's not one that's sitting on the board that was born here. Are we treated special when we're born here? And we're outcast because we're not born here? And then when we have a veteran that's from Greenwich, moves into our community to honor us as a survivor of the Philippines, a survivor of the Death March, and we refer to him, he's not born here. And then when we have a mob, to impress the mob, we have somebody, I was born here, I don't live. If I were a veteran, I wouldn't even buy a car from Mitchell's if that's how they're going to treat us. And it's time and time and time again, he stands here, he shows his wallet, this is this, and he goes through a tirade, a diatribe, and it makes no sense. And everybody on this board is afraid to stand up for what is right.
You could summarize,
And a good
Mr.
example
Townsend.
of that is the way this hearing was handled on the horses. That was not a hearing, that was a mob. And as a citizen of Simsbury, and as a veteran of Simsbury, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed that flag flew over that hearing. It was a mob.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Anyone else? Sir.
Hi, my name is Mark Sullivan. I live at 52 East Weetog Street, and I guess I was responsible for that mob. I went through careful talks with the town ahead of time, and with full dialogue and open dialogue, came to the realization, and it was mutual that I needed legal assistance, which was with the way zoning rules were set up, the only way I could impact policy and communication. And where the impetus or the catalyst for my concerns was in the neighborhood, I chose to take on what would be exclusionary for most citizens and people, given the state of the economy nowadays, to take on, and that was to craft a moratorium with legal assistance on one basic thing: to distinguish a hobby farm, horse for pleasure, versus a commercial horse farm. And there are stark and considerable differences. The other submission was a collection of town zoning regulations from various towns who have, in some cases, less equine population, in other cases more. Wealthy and poor, Portland, Westport, Killingworth, etc. And by initial form of structured government, we had to visit planning first, and we did fall into long-term town planning in terms of what we had brought before planning, where I'm sure two of their hallmarks are looking at things that are viable and things that have impact. So, given that, I would just like the Selectmen's encouragement to encourage the people on the zoning board to please go forward with something when they return to service this fall on the crafting of regulations, because at present there are none besides numbers of horses on X amount of acres of land and the 100 foot away from neighbor manure storage. So I thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summer and have a good election
Thank you,
year.
Mr. Sullivan. Thank you. You're welcome to stay the rest of the meeting. We'll be here for a while. So. Oh.
Excuse me.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. Mr. Crowley.
I'm Dan Crowley. I've been a tax-paying citizen since 1955, but I'm still an immigrant. I'm wearing this strange T-shirt, which I hope you all see. Cost me $10 to add the risk. The T-shirt was a novelty from Colorado, but I decided risk was important to add. Some fellow quoted in the Farmington Valley Times of July 19 on the front page, some fellow named Henny or Hensley, my glasses aren't too good, I haven't renewed them, something about he's a chairman of a performing arts, I guess, and he labeled me as a security risk. So I decided I'd better follow through and label myself in full Virginia. Now I wish someone would pass the word to him if he's in the audience, possibly he could hear it, but he'll get a report of the meeting somehow, that I'd be delighted to go further and wear an ankle bracelet if that would place the citizens in a mood where they wouldn't be afraid of me. It's a security risk. I'd be delighted to if Mrs. Glassman suggests I should. Now, he furthermore decided that town-owned property owned by the people should have massive new fencing. Now, on that subject, I guess I'll have to go along with him. If he wants massive new fencing, he should copy the thing called the Berlin Wall, which was rather high, probably 12 or 15 feet, I believe. And I think it was topped with barbed wire. That should keep the riffraff out and all the troublemakers who are security risks. Now, the one dangerous thing that he seems to want to block is the flow of sound either through or over the fencing and walls. I think that's rather difficult to do, but at very least it would be extremely expensive. And I don't think the selectmen of this board want to underwrite that expense.
Probably.
Now, he goes a step further that he needs this fellow that's quoted, Henny or Hensley or something, that he should have loads of more guards. He doesn't have enough guards. Now, I would suggest, to embellish his thinking, that these guards should be recruited with an aggressive campaign, and we should create a uniform for them with, I think it's called Schwarzenhosen, and brown shirts, and black caps, and jackboots would be suitable. And I think they should wear vivid red armbands with a skull and crossbones insignia. That should further keep the terrorist, dangerous people, such as myself, at bay. I submit that idea to you to satisfy him. Now, we have a precious asset in this fantastic community we all live in and love so much, called the Farmington Valley Orchestra. It creates, this group of wonderful musicians, bring out sound that is as equal to or superior to a name brand celebrity group, which we've been a slave to at this piece of property owned by we the people. I don't see any sense to it. We should give full endorsement to our own. If any of you have had the pleasure of attending their concerts at the ice rink, and they're sparsely attended because the people seem to prefer celebrity names, they don't charge. And they've been allowed by the, I guess, the Board of Selectmen to play a few times at our town-owned public property called, I think it's the Minnow it's labeled. And they perform beautifully and everyone loves them. Now they have one serious deficit, let's say a piece of equipment they lack, which the celebrity band seems to have in abundance. Massive speakers, sound amplifying systems. As the small community band, they probably can't afford such massive speakers. But if we, the people led by our Board of Selectmen, get behind them, get behind this treasure called the Farmington Valley, blah, 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 and endorse them as the sole orchestra to be allowed to play on our public property, as other towns do, adjacent towns do. They don't fence in their public property, give to private entities the right to charge. It's open to the public who own the land. I think we should do the same. I don't think we should take a back seat to the other communities. Let's not give any specific group such awesome power to lord over the people and tell the people where they can sit. As an example of the sad state it's gotten to, we had this cancellation of someone named Frempum, and we're not in the business to make profits or take losses. We're a town. We're not in the entertainment business. We don't have to worry whether Mr. Frampton, whoever he is, cancels or doesn't cancel. That's I think, an absolute joke. I notice I just got a mailing from the Celebrity Symphony Band, and it's labeled with various corporate names of magnitude. MetLife, United Tech, money, golly, Arts Council, etc., Hartford Foundation. Probably, in addition to the contributions of the giant corporations, if the Board of Selectmen appointed a committee to cooperate with the Chamber of Commerce, we could have a fundraising campaign to make up for any costs involved to we the people to allow our wonderful Farmington Valley Band to play there and not charge the public. That is what I'd like to leave with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. I will pass along your comments to the Performing Arts Board as well. Yes, sir.
That's a tough act to follow.
It is.
Very good, Mr.
Good job.
So I'm going to talk for less time, I think, than some, but I'm John Lucker, 88 Blue Ridge Drive, Simsbury. I'm also the president of the SHARE group. I'm going to actually talk about something a little similar to what Mr. Crowley spoke about, and that is the use of public land for private enterprise. I have some prepared remark. On July 30th, 2012, the Simsbury zoning chairman, Rob Pomeroy, and commissioners Dave Ryan, Jerry Post, and Vaughn Marecki voted to open and close the public hearing on the application for the Big Y proposed at the north end of Route 10 in a record time of 1 hour. By closing the public hearing, these zoning commissioners closed the ability to gather all the facts needed to render an informed decision and ignored the careful and deliberate land use process that has been a hallmark of this town for at least 100 years. As well, the tactic of closing the public hearing means that the Zoning Commission cannot listen to comments like mine tonight unless they choose to. Building a Big Y on the Wagner property is not a by right project for the developer under current zoning. The developer needed 5 special exceptions by the Zoning Commission to build the Big Y. Number 1, to build on an aquifer protection area that provides drinking water to surrounding neighborhoods. Number 2, to increase the amount of building and pavement on the lot from what's allowed, 40%, to what's needed by the developer, 60%. Number 3, to use the land for a grocery store instead of other types of business for which it was zoned. Number 4, to reduce the amount of parking as required by the town. Number 5, a right-of-way from the town to allow their 18-wheeler delivery trucks to exit via the skating center driveway, enter and exit via the skating center driveway. This last issue is on tonight's Board of Selectmen agenda and the one that I'd like to speak about. As I've commented to you all before, zoning in Simsbury lately seems too much a process of special exception, not a process of compliance to existing regulations. By town ordinance, the Big Y development is considered a large and complex project, and accordingly, the town land use boards have the right to ask the developer to fund independent, unbiased, environmental, economic, and traffic studies. The Zoning Commission just needed to ask for these things to gather more information from Big Y. We all want development, we all want tax relief, we all want net economic benefit, but we all want responsible development done right. What the Zoning Commission should have asked is, what is the real net economic benefit of a 54,000 square foot grocery? As I've spoken to this board about before, groceries is a zero-sum game. Households don't eat more food when an additional grocery store is constructed. So in the end, there is a dilution of spending which causes other businesses to fail. Just ask Andy's about that. Andy said just that in the newspaper after his store closed. Spending for groceries and other items elsewhere caused his long-standing Simsbury business to falter and ultimately fail. The Zoning Commission also should have asked, what is the full environmental impact of excessive building on a primary aquifer, and how will the developer protect our drinking water? During the presentation, the developer stated their plan would remove, quote, most of the pollutants from draining into the aquifer. Given that the word most of the pollutants doesn't mean all of the pollutants, I hope none of us have to drink the stuff that slips through the cracks. I think this clearly should have been studied. The Zoning Commission also should have asked, what is the real traffic impact from Big Y delivery trucks and customers to Route 10? For example, traffic studies submitted by the developer did not include the traffic projections created by the 200 new apartments that are being built next door in Dorset Crossing. I've also heard that the Connecticut Department of Transportation has had problems with the proposal, and Big Y asked Bob Kane to close part of his parking lot to allow for special traffic flow construction at the intersection. That's permanent closing of his part of his parking lot. Can you imagine that the developers had the nerve to ask Bob Kane for a favor like that, given the risk to his business from the Big Y? And now we are here tonight hearing Big Y ask for special exception number 5. They want to use the town-owned road to the skating center for the entry and exit of their large delivery trucks. What a slippery slope this is, the use of town-owned public property for private commercial enterprise. Where does the line get drawn on that? If the town does this here, why not everywhere? What are we going to do the next time a private enterprise asks for such a favor? Why can't Big Y build their truck access road on Rick Wagner's other adjacent property on the opposite side of the proposed Big Y site? I believe this is because Mr. Wagner actually doesn't own that property. He rents it. So why should Mr. Wagner think that it's okay to use Simsbury public land for his project if he can't get his landlord to put a road on that other property? Why can't Mr. Wagner use his property for all aspects of his project? To conclude, in my opinion, this Big Y project is the wrong development for Simsbury, it's the wrong development for that site, and it's too big for leaving such essential questions unanswered and unvalidated. I respectfully ask tonight that the Board of Selectmen deny the request for Big Y to use the skating center access road for their development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Sue Benarzik, 119 East Weetag Street. I, too, am here to talk about land use tonight. And as a sidebar to Mr. Crowley's remarks, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since he was speaking tonight, when I was at one of the concerts, they referred to the gentleman who had initially asked him to leave as somebody who had served in the war. And that is not correct. He's in the National Guard. He has never served like Mr. Crowley has. So I think that needs to be dealt with publicly because somebody from the symphony had addressed that. And I think that it's ironic when he did what he did to Mr. Crowley. So my neighbor's putting an addition onto her house. Her next door neighbor's putting in a pool. And as we know, the Ellsworths came in across the street to put in their 3-lot subdivision. Well, when my neighbor went to find out how they were going to work this, they found out that their wetland moved 40 yards. Now, I find that absolutely mystifying. So I'm going to ask you, Mary, to see if we can get Howard to check how a wetland could move 40 yards. Because if the wetland really is where it's supposed to be, then those 3 lots weren't going to be able to be built. It would have been 2 lots. So I think that's something that needs to be looked into. And in addition, we still have the drainage issue created by the Planning Commission when they refused to deal with the drainage issue. So they felt like they could deal with the drainage issue at another meeting having to do with the subdivision on Hildecrest. So now that the Planning Commission, actually Mike Payne, who's in the back, gave the developer a free pass, now the town has to pay for anything having to do with the drainage issue. And also, I've been studying the Board of Ethics list because every resident's supposed to be treated equally. And when I watched how they were treating the people who came with the drainage issue on Hildecrest, and then I watched how I was treated and my neighbors, who basically said they, quote unquote, my neighbor, the town planner, they put their personal feelings in front of their professional feelings. I found it, again, ironic. So we still want our drainage issue handled, and now you guys have to handle it because they didn't. So I read a document today that talked about land use, and there's a term now that you use in land use called LULU, which is a locally unwanted land use. Now, a Lulu to me is something that's always described when I was younger as that's a Lulu. So I'm kind of going to refer to that for the big Y. Because after asking for their 5 exceptions and now looking to basically be purchasing some of the town land so that they can get their trucks in and run the other, Fitzgeralds and Canes out of business, I want to bring back, again, the name Circle Commerce, who had talked to the Wagners about going there. And when we leave economic development up to the developer, they're going to take what they get the best money for. So instead of getting Circle Commerce, which is a tech firm, which is what was recommended, which is growing, and in Avon, not in Simsbury, the guy lives in Simsbury, we are now stuck with a big Y, which is going to create a lot of traffic, and we're not nearly going to get the taxes we would get from Circle Commerce, which is a technology company. And let's not remember, the Design Review Board did not support this project as it is. And when Rob Pomeroy said he wanted to vote for it, he said, well, we have other studies in town, like the Plan of Development and the Route 10 Corridor Study, but we just like this, so we don't have to look at those. So when you go to a zoning meeting and it takes an hour and you watch that, you feel really disrespected as a resident. So I would encourage you guys also to vote this down tonight or table it and try to figure out something else, because it is not the best use of the land. We can't keep giving away free passes, as proven by the wetland issue that's, on my street, in addition to the drainage issue. It just blows my mind. 40 yards. How do you move a wetland 40 yards? That is unique. So I think we need to have somebody objective come in and look at that. But I think the most important thing that I just talked about is the big Y, and the fact that we really need to assess it to see if it's the best use of that land. And if we could possibly try to recruit something else, that would actually be better. Thank you.
Anyone else want to address the board? Okay. Seeing no one else, I'll close the public audience.
I forgot one important quick subject. May I?
Sure, Mr. Kelly, sure.
Thank you.
But 1 second, because if it goes longer, I have to suggest.
No, 1 minute.
All right, even
All right.
though you're a security risk, I'm
I realize I'm a security risk. No, this is another subject. We have a magnificent town-owned piece of land, the corner of Strattonbrook Road, Bushy-Hill Road. It's a forest. Beneath it lies one of our most important, largest aquifers. So, in a nutshell, let's forget about cutting those trees down, paving it, and building a senior center there. We had to fight to stop the school board and its chairwoman a few years ago, who wanted to cut all the trees down, pave it with blacktop around the buildings, and have the aquifer poisoned. She cared nothing about the consequences, that it was going to be $95 million high school But thank God our Board of Finance was a little smarter, and they proposed $45 million and did the wonderful job on our present high school and brought all the other schools up to date. So it shows you we've got to be careful, and let's never cut a forest down with an aquifer beneath it.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley.
Thank you.
It's on our agenda tonight, so we thank you for those comments. Thank you all for your comments. We're going to move right into our budget meeting, Board of Selectmen meeting. Our first, I'm like all confused.
It's like a rewind.
Our first item is our Korean War Armistice Proclamation. Before Mr. Crowley leaves, Mr. Crowley did want to thank you and Mr. Kalishman, who spoke, for your service. It's very important to us, and we really appreciate your service. I know. And thank you, Mr. Kalishman, for bringing this forward. My father fought in the Korean War, and so I appreciate the remembrance. So thank you for bringing that forward. We did receive a Government Finance Officers Association Certificate of Achievement Award. This is a very prestigious award that the town has received based on our finances, so we're pleased to accept that award, and thank you, Mary Ann, for all your hard work. And I have an update for the board on the Northeast Utility Substation. I know we had a few outages over the last few weeks, and folks have been asking what is the status of that. I'm pleased to report that the project is on schedule. It is expected to be completed the first half of 2014. If the board remembers, we worked with the Northeast Utilities to address the reliability issues. As a result, we convinced them to double the size of the substation through installing a larger capacity voltage transformers. This project is expected to cost between $7 and $10 million and will pay between $175,000 and $180,000 in additional tax revenue. And more importantly, it will bring important reliability to many of our transformers and users, and will make a big difference in some of our reliability. So our thanks to Northeast Utilities for moving forward on that. As my first selectman report tonight, I wanted to bring good news. I wanted to thank the board for their support on the Yukon water diversion. This board supported a resolution that we would oppose the MDC's interbasin transfers of the use of the waters that serve the Farmington Valley to serve Yukon. I want to thank the board for their support. I want to thank particularly the Conservation Commission, Don Rieger, who took a very public and active role, Sally Rieger, who also assisted the town in being an advocate for this issue, the Terrifield Village Association, which spoke very eloquently, and the Board of Selectmen, particularly Lisa Hevner, who spoke along with me at the public hearing. So I want to thank also the Farmington Valley Collaborative Towns. We have a meeting on Thursday morning where we'll be talking about further action on a water plan that we have gotten a lot of support from Representative Hampton and Senator Witkos on this issue. So we're going to bring it back before the Board of Selectmen after Thursday's meeting with the Farmington Valley Collaborative. But I did want to publicly thank everyone. This was a really big effort. The Metropolitan District Commission spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying to push their alternative, which would not have served the town or the Farmington Valley. So our thanks to everyone. A couple of quick highlights. September is a busy month. I wanted to remind folks to put Septemberfest on their calendar. Friday, September 6th from 5 to 10, Saturday, September 7th from 11 to 10, and Sunday, September 8th from 11 to 5. We want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the Performing Arts Board for all their hard work in bringing back a wonderful tradition. While you're marking your calendars, I wanted to remind you the Simsbury Women's Club will host its 44th, hard to believe, annual Crafts and Festival, Arts and Crafts Festival, Saturday, September 14th and Sunday, September 15th. This is a wonderful event, features more than 100 artists. In addition, there's food, bake sales. The hours are 10 to 5, rain or shine, and most of the funding, all of the funding that the Simsbury Women's Club makes goes back to donations for the Farmington Valley and Simsbury nonprofits. While you're out at Septemberfest, at the Arts and Crafts Festival, after you've been to Septemberfest, I remind you to put the Grange Agricultural Fair on your calendar, Saturday, September 14th from 10 to 3. The Simsbury Grange will be hosting their second annual fair, and special thanks to Sue Messino, who was here and has rejuvenated the Grange, and Judy Schaefer, who's here as well. Thank you for all your hard work in bringing the Grange forward. And finally, the town was informed this afternoon that we have made Money Magazine's top 50 best places to live on Earth. So congratulations to town of Simsbury. We were noted for being one of the top places because everything our community has to offer, from our schools to our businesses to our bike paths and so much more. The article, if you haven't seen it, highlights our rich history, our commitment to open space, our boutiques, farmers markets, and our five-star restaurants. So congratulations to everyone on having Simsbury make the top 50 blessed places on Earth. Congratulations. We'll now move to our agenda items. Our first item this evening is approve the proposed amendments to the Simsbury Code of Ordinances concerning the storage, collection, and disposal of recyclable materials. Thank you, Mr. Roy, for bringing this forward. Thank you, Lori Fernand from the Recycling Committee. Mary Turner and Cheryl Cook is here from the Recycling Committee, so thank you as well for being here. Tom, I know we want to walk through the ordinance. This is the second time this has been on our agenda, maybe the third time. It's been on a lot. But I think it's important because we do want to boost the recycling rates in our community. It's really important. And I know we've talked about doing some public awareness for some time, so I'm glad that the Recycling Committee is coming forward with some plans. So we'll look forward to hearing your suggestions and your budget as you move forward. But I think there were some questions raised in public audience, Tom. If you could just walk through basically the changes from the old ordinance to the new ordinance.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. We have been here a few times talking about recycling, and
Yes.
The long and short of it, this is updating an ordinance which had become outdated with the close of the Mid-Connecticut project and the changes occurring at CRRA and within the region. Primarily, this is going to allow us options for our curbside recycling other than CRRA. As the ordinance is currently written, we have one option, CRRA. That option right now would pay us somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 a ton based upon the net cost of operation for CRRA. Long and the short of that, that means at the end of the year, they look at their balance sheet, and if they had a good year, they may give us what we've earned in terms of the recycling cent from the town of Simsbury. The fact of the matter is we can do better than that on the free market. At the same time, the town is not really in the trash business. We have subscription service where our residents have a choice. We've devised this ordinance in a way that allows the haulers to make informed decisions on where the market is best for them, where their shortest routes are versus what facilities will pay the most money. At the same time, we're going to be made whole by paying the same, if not more, than what we are currently eligible through CRRA. And as Lori mentioned, we have the option each and every year to adjust that rate. We have the ability to look at recycling facilities which are both municipally owned and privately owned to make sure the rate we're collecting is fair. All of the recycling collectors operating in the town of Simsbury will be required to commit to us for this rate. And as a recycling hauler in the state of Connecticut, they have to report quarterly to the state of Connecticut on how many tons of recycled materials they collect and where that material is brought to, so that we have assurances that the material is being handled properly. Recycling, unlike trash, is actually a valuable commodity, as Mr. Kalishman brought up. It's no longer a liability, and the prices range between 10, 15, sometimes as much as $25 a ton, depending upon the market and the various facilities. So we have the opportunity for this first year to probably collecting $10 a ton on the town's behalf, while allowing our haulers to make a little bit more of a margin, which is going to reduce the rates paid for our residents, and also provide an incentive for the haulers to increase and take part in programs which will increase our overall recycling rates.
So Tom, just to clarify, so the first step is to change the ordinance. The second step, you'll come back to the board once you've had a chance to survey the other rates.
Exactly.
And then any company that registers with the town, and right now there's 2.
That's correct.
But if there should be 4 or 6, those who register will have to pay a certain rate.
That's exactly right. Everybody will be paying the same rate.
So while we're not bidding out the rate, we are having a competitive process in that we're reviewing what other contracts allow, incorporating that into our fees, and then allowing anyone to register who wants to offer the service.
Exactly.
To pay the same. Okay. I know this differs, some of the questions raised, because the town of Simsbury does not collect trash or recyclables. West Hartford did do a town-wide contract, did hire a company to collect trash. We often have looked at that as an option for the town. I think the last time we looked at that, it was recommended that we leave it as a private entity so folks can have a choice of who to hire.
Yeah, and we had looked specifically at the recycling about a year ago. We hired a consultant to
Right.
review whether or not rates had gotten to the point that the town could actually collect recyclables and make a profit. And although the recycling in and of itself has a value when you associate the labor, the trucking, and all of the work involved in collecting it and bringing it to a facility, it was far from profitable.
So if we adopt this ordinance tonight, we would change the ordinance, and then you'll be back before us to set the amount the town would like to charge. And then could you also send forward the comments of the recycling committee that I think were raised earlier in the evening?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, great. Any questions on the ordinance? Questions? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the ordinance?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ryan Weathers is here. Ryan, welcome, and thank you for being here. Ryan is here. We're very fortunate in Simsbury to have a number of Eagle Scouts who are working on projects, and lucky for us, we have a lot of projects for them to do. So Ryan is here. He'd like to fix a section of the trail that goes to Simsbury Farms Golf Course. Some of the trail becomes washed out and very rough, and your intent is to work with the Culture Parks and Rec Commission and town staff to address the improvements. And Ryan's project has already been approved by Culture Parks and Rec Commission, so welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think if you leave it there and open it, I think it's a good place for the camera and for the board to see that. I think that might be, yeah, that's great. Perfect.
So some of the pictures might be hard to see from where you are, but so these are pictures of the trail, and in this picture you can see railroad ties. There are 4 of them, and on each one, like they're pretty much covered up right now with the dirt that's been moved around by the water since it's on an incline. So the water from rain, when it rains a lot, it moves all the dirt and creates trenches and other sorts of like hazards when you're walking on the trail. It's the worst part of the trail right now to walk on when it rains a lot. So all the railroad ties aren't doing anything right now, and my plan is to put sock pipe in front of the railroad tie so that the water is diverted off the trail and doesn't just keep running down it. So here's my plan. I'm going to have sock pipe and then divert it off the trail to a better area. There's a lake downhill that is part of the golf course, and I'll divert it in that general direction. And yeah, this picture is just, there was a trench on one of the in front of one of the railroad ties, so I was going to use that trench to help divert the water. And do you have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Are the materials expensive?
It's about $1,000, I think.
And are you doing any fundraising?
Yes.
And
Are you writing a check?
I'll
see her.
His first official press release about it. I want to see what the value of the you do. How are you with the fundraising? Are you?
I haven't started yet.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Thank you for asking. So you need donations?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions to the board?
Just thank you for coming to us and for your work on this.
And you're with Troop 175. Is there anybody here tonight you want to introduce?
Mr. Mead.
Welcome, Mr. Mead. Thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing us so many Eagle Scouts.
If we can't do the work for the town, who else could we do it for? 50th greatest town on earth. Is that correct? We need to raise our sights a little bit.
There you go. Okay, and I see Mr. Jeff is here, Jeff Bush is here from Parks and Rec Commission, so thank you for being here. My understanding is that this has been approved by Parks and Rec Commission.
We really need the work to be done.
Yep.
We are very, very happy that Ryan is selected this project. We ask you to adopt it because it's a great project.
And Mr. Beach has approved it as well.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Can I have a motion to approve the project with our thanks?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The project is approved, and thank you for your hard work, and let us know where to send the checks. The next item is to accept a grant from the Capital Area Substance Abuse Council for a Simsbury Suicide Prevention Initiative. This is a really wonderful initiative that was brought to us by Tom Steen, the Executive Director of CASAC, and Tom is here this evening. So, Tom, thank you very much for being here. We're very grateful for your support and for your help in putting together this grant. Simsbury did apply for the grant, and I'm pleased to report that we did receive the grant. We're one of only 8 towns in Connecticut that will be working on a suicide prevention initiative. This is a very important conversation for our community to have. It's really important that we keep all of our residents healthy and that we show those in need that we're a supportive community and a community that cares. And Tom is very grateful, has been meeting with a group of Simsbury people who want very much to put this program together. We did receive the grant pending Board of Selectmen approval. What that means is in September, we'll be training community leaders throughout our town that have contact with the vulnerable of our community that need help, and it will be trained in how to recognize signs, how to connect folks in need with support services, how to ask the right questions, and we're really very, very honored that we have such a wonderful community that supports this initiative. I do want to read the number of the groups that are supporting this initiative because I think it's, if I could find my list. Yeah. Have your list? Okay. That's what happens when you have a 3-page agenda. There you go. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. I want to thank the Simsbury Board of Education and Lisa Hebner, who's been liaison with the Board of Education and coordinating the Board of Ed, the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce and Anne Marie Potter, who's been part of our organizing team, and the Chamber of Commerce, Simsbury Parks and Rec Department, Simsbury Department of Social Services, Simsbury Housing Authority, the New McLean, I guess the term they're using, Dr. Elizabeth Paracat, Pro Health Physicians, the Simsbury Police Department, Simsbury Senior Center, the Simsbury Superintendent of Schools, and the Simsbury United Methodist Church. This is a great group that will look at topics ranging from best practices to warning signs to strategies for people seeking intervention to suggestions to strengthen positive influences and using local and state resources. We're scheduling Thursday, September 19th from 8:30 to 1 at the Simsbury United Methodist Church as a session to which Tom will conduct to begin to train community leaders and how to talk about this important topic. Some of the statistics really are, I'll let Tom talk about how important this conversation is, because some of the statistics for suicide affecting communities across Connecticut are pretty staggering. So it's a conversation that we're grateful for you, Tom, to bring here to Simsbury and excited to participate in. So at this point, I'll call on Tom to add anything that you'd like to add. Thank you, Mark.
My comments will be short. Thank you, Board, for inviting me. And on behalf of the Board of Directors of CASAC, Capital Area Substance Abuse Council, they're very pleased to offer this grant to you, mini grant. The funding comes from the State Department of Mental Health and Addictive Services. It's through a special national grant called the Garrett Lee Smith Initiative. It's money for campuses, actually, though in our state there was extra money, so they took the dollars and said, let's try to roll it out to communities. So Simsbury has been chosen. The training will happen here in September, though it can be a tough subject to deal with. There's many stigmas connected to it. I think by starting the conversation and getting people throughout our community to a place where mental health and wellness is there, and as a community, when our lifespan of people struggle with this subject and suicidal thoughts, mental health issues, as a community we support them and we help them to get help. And so that's kind of where it is. It's a beginning. It's a new initiative. The state of Connecticut is kind of leading this effort. So, and it's not happening anywhere else in the country. So we should all feel really good as Simsbury, and I'm a Simsbury resident, so I'm pleased to be here to participate in it because I think it's going to set a pattern not only for Connecticut but for the country. My final comment to it all is I think the Simsbury initiative, as we roll forward, will not only help to prevent suicide, but when one does happen, we know how to deal with it. And I have a special kind of part in my life because my son died of suicide 3.5 years ago. And the way survivors deal with this, it's a journey that you don't want to share, but it's a journey that people like myself and my family have to walk after something like this happens. And the most important part of healing and you never get over it. It's always there, but you learn how to live with it. Is community and support. So it's really important. My passion, obviously, and I'm so pleased that Simsbury is doing it. I'm doing 8 other trainings here in the next couple of months. Several towns in basically Region 4, which is 46 towns throughout my area. And our hope is that by next year, June, that all the communities that are a part of this will have full initiatives in place, preventing, and if it does occur, what do we do post-vention-wise? So, are for any questions?
We'll take questions. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for bringing this to us and for your passion, and we're sorry for your experiences and grateful that you're sharing your, teaching us how to come together as a community to be supportive. So we're grateful to you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any questions for the board? Lisa, you wanted to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Tom and Anne Marie, and I think
Phil James is here, and he's been
Phil
part
is
of
here.
the planning process as well.
And just to thank you for bringing this message. You're right, this is something we don't often talk about, but it is something, as you told me, it is something that's preventable if we know how to do it. And so this is a way to educate our community and talk about an issue that sometimes people don't want to talk about, but in talking about it, we can help move forward and hopefully save a life. I think you gave some statistics on how many in Connecticut die.
A person dies every day by suicide in our state. It's evidence-based. Last year's statistics show it. And that's only the folks who die here. My son was attending college, so he wasn't a part of the statistics 3.5 years ago. So I think it's really important. It's kind of that hidden disease, if you will, in our community when folks, and it's the stigma. It's people that, and there's religion things connected to it as well. We've learned to talk about drug abuse, incest. We've learned to talk about all kinds of community ills. This is kind of the last one that our communities, not only here in Simsbury, but throughout our state, have to really kind of embrace. It's all right to talk about it. It's all right to talk to survivors, and find a way to make a healthier place for all of us to live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to say thank you. In my former life, I was a mental health nurse with children and adolescents, and I have seen firsthand the value of education. And really, like you said, coming together as a community. So, thank you very much for putting yourself out there and helping the community.
I'll do my best.
Just for the public who may be interested in getting involved, the first step is to hold a training session for community leaders. These will include, invitations will go out once the board approves it to community leaders, business leaders, folks who deal with youth, community church leaders, as well as folks who deal with the elderly, and all those who deal with folks looking for jobs or those who might be unemployed. So we've tried to hit all of the various sectors of the community. Once the training is done, and I don't know if, Tom, you want to add this, then the group will decide what the next steps are and how to involve folks who may want to get involved. So the first step is to educate the core group that has immediate responsibility or contacts with folks in crisis or in need, and then to figure out how we move forward as a community to bring awareness to the entire community. So I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, the mini grant dollars are for that next step. So once the group is trained and has an idea of prevention and what prevention of suicide is all about, then as a community can decide just how to use that mini grant. And my hope is that there'll be more dollars. We know, unfortunately, because of Sandy Hook, mental health has risen to a high level in discussions, not only here locally, but at our state level and at the federal level. And there's all indications that with its new awareness of mental health, that there'll be additional dollars. So as a community, we can be positioned once we're trained and we have an initiative in place, then we'll be able to reach out either through my organization or as an entity onto yourself to reach out for those additional dollars. I really do think that we know that mental health and suicide, though they're not connected, but somebody said this to me, and it's a great analogy. It's like a braid. You know, substance abuse, mental health, and addiction is a braid of why folks find themselves in a suicidal state. So if we can look at all of those areas and braid them together, then we've done our job.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Can we have a motion to accept the grant with our thanks and to begin the initiative under the Capital Area Substance Abuse Council?
I'll move that.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you again for being here. Thanks, Tom and Anne Marie, Philip, and Lisa for bringing this forward. Look forward to working with you. Next item is to approve tax refunds. We have our tax collector here. Colleen has reviewed all the tax refunds, and those refunds total $66,104. And that is a large number, but that is also a very usual number right after taxes are due and paid. Sometimes folks pay and then want to take the deduction in one fiscal year and then get the refund afterwards. So any questions on the tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector?
It's too high.
We're not going to refund it. You want to make that motion?
Pull a page off? Give us a couple of weeks, right?
Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Still too
Next
high.
item is to approve a resolution allowing Simsbury to enter into an interlocal agreement with the Houston Galveston Area Council for the purpose of procuring goods from its bid list. I'll let Tom explain it, but basically the Capital Region Council of Governments, CROG, has a similar bid list that they put together, and the towns are allowed to buy goods off of those lists. Some other councils of government have ventured into different areas to secure their lists. This particular list is large equipment, and we were made aware that many towns in Connecticut are, instead of putting out a bid on equipment, are buying off of this bid list as well. So the town of Simsbury can't buy off this list unless it's authorized by the Board of Selectmen. But Mr. Roy has some information as to how he became aware. So Tom.
Well, long and the short of it, our large equipment vendors brought this to our attention. There's a couple of these national level bidding sources out there now, and basically we end up buying the same equipment that we would spec out normally. We're buying it from the same vendors that we normally do. It's warranted through our local vendors. It's just a matter of if it comes through these national organizations, we end up with their buying power here in Simsbury. So the exact same piece of equipment is sold at the local level to the retailers at a lower rate than they can normally buy it. There's no cost to participate in this. Just as a matter, we just need to have the interlocal agreement in place, and it allows us to effectively get a discount on some of our heavy equipment.
Any questions?
I just have a comment. I just wanted to point out that as I was reading through this, you underlined the part that I was going to ask about, which is purchase directly from local vendors, because I think that we can still do that is what makes this great. You save money, but you can also still keep the business local.
Yep.
Any other questions? Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are approved. Thank you, Tom. Next item is an action on fee changes for certain items as requested by Paynes for the Simsbury Transfer Station facility. If you recall, this was on our agenda earlier. We did refer it to Rich Sawitsky and town staff to review. We did do a comparable fee for items. Rich also pointed out that the contract is close to the end, so we would be renewing, changing fees at the end of a contract. So it was Rich's suggestion that we incorporate the fees into the next agreement that is approved. So any questions on that? So the item we would not take action on this tonight because the contract is almost expired. And we would direct staff to review the bidding process, whether we need a bidding process or an extension of the contract going forward. Questions?
When is our contract renewed?
It is up, it needs to be renewed by November.
Okay.
So we're close to the end of the contract. In looking at what we've done in the past, we've renewed contracts we've extended contracts for an additional year when the fees have remained the same. So that would be an option if the board wanted to renew the contract for a year. We did that with our town attorney. We renewed it for one extension, but the fees didn't change. In this, it's a little different because the fees are changing. So we would just wait till the next contract is negotiated and have that come before the board. It's the board's option.
With a possible bid.
Well, we did extend the legal contract for 1 year at the same fee, so that would be a precedent that we would consider. I would recommend to the board, or we could do what Rich is suggesting and just deal with the new fee schedule at the beginning of the next contract period. We're at the end of the 3-year contract period. It doesn't make sense to, by the time you advertise and change the rates, we're already into the next contract. So I guess I'd ask for a motion to table until town staff can renew the contract.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Just one of the things we sent Tom Roy away to do was do a comparable, so that's part of this, right?
Yes, it is. You've received that.
Okay.
So you'll see that the rates, in some cases are lower and in some cases higher than other comparable rates. So I think the rates went from a 6.25% increase to a 15% decrease. I think that's what the fee schedule is showing.
Right. Yeah, because we've got Avon, Canton, and Granby, so they're kind of all over the board. We seem to be about the middle of most of them.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next item is to approve the first selectman to sign an easement to allow the development of Big Y. Hiram is here this evening. I want to thank the comments that we had earlier. Thank you, Mr. Lucker, for your memo. It's well thought out and it's very detailed, so I appreciate that. I did want to remind the board that this is not a hearing on the Big Y application. We do not sit as the Land Use Commission in improving the merits of the application. I think some of the points raised earlier in public audience, whether we would have closed the public hearing after an hour, or whether we would have approved those easements, those are something that we may or may not agree with, but that is the process that we have to follow, and that is the process that the application went through. So just for clarification, we cannot, by law, act on the application, the merits of the application, whether we agree or disagree with some of the points that were raised earlier. Those individuals are elected, and they are voted on in to do those functions. So legally, we can't act on the merits. So I just wanted to remind the board, I know you all know, but remind the public as well, the item before us is the request to use the easement. It's coming before the Board of Selectmen because and Hiram is here, because the Zoning Commission site plan approval did agree to the traffic pattern that was proposed, and Mr. Lucker pointed that out. It was reviewed by the Department of Transportation, and that was approved. The lawyers for Big Y approached the town because the road that they were authorized to use by the Zoning Commission and by the Department of Transportation, they legally don't have the easement. It's a private road that the town has an easement, and World Skate has an easement. That's the old name of this skating center. So in order for them to adhere to the zoning application that's already been approved, they need to come to the legislative body to allow them to use the easement that the town told them they needed to use. The other option is the town could ask for another curb cut and another road, but the Zoning Commission opted, along with the Route 10 corridor study, not to do that. So with that background, I'll just ask Hiram to basically just walk through why it's before us. And I know you have a map there, so maybe that would help the board as well.
Well, Mary, this is the site plan that the Zoning Commission reviewed, one of the sheets of the site plan. The proposed traffic pattern is there'll be a new light for the new driveway for the Big Y. Vehicles, all vehicles, would come in the entrance, would also be an exit there as well, but delivered vehicles would come in, proceed to the rear of the store, loading docks are in the rear, and then proceed directly out and go through the skating center driveway, the town property, the skating center. This has been reviewed extensively since last October by the State Traffic Commission, or Office of State Traffic Administration as it's now called, and there was a lot of discussion about whether that was the best pattern. There was also some discussion about the other access into the property, that is southbound traffic would be able to turn into the property without having to go down to this light and back that traffic up, and they eventually approved that as well. There's a lot of discussion about drainage on the site. That's all being taken care of with regard to pervious paving on the site, the applicant has agreed to do as well. And I'd just like to point out too, I'm not sure how many people, maybe some of you were here before the skating center was built, but if it weren't actually for the fact that Mr. Wagner allowed the drainage from the skating center property to go into his property and into this pond and this area here, the skating center wouldn't have been built. So there's a quid pro quo here that I think all the people who have looked at this carefully agree that there's certainly reasons to do it, make this development work well, make it work safely, and not provide any additional traffic hazards on Route 10. So happy to answer any other questions, but that's kind of it in a nutshell where they are now.
Thank you. Hiram, if the town didn't approve the easement, could you speak to what would be the options?
Well, Francis, the whole site would have to be reorganized. Because the drainage for the site is here, it's very unlikely that the traffic would be able to come back out onto Route 10 here. As you said, Mary, one of the things that the Route 10 study talked about was minimizing the curb cuts in this area. Traffic moves along pretty quickly here. And I think that some of the people are probably going to realize that with the placement of these signals in various locations, this is going to slow the traffic down slightly, but to make it safer. But the fact is that if it weren't able to use this town-owned property to access back to Hot Meadow Street, it would have to figure out how to do it in this area here. It's highly unlikely, frankly, that the Department of Transportation would look favorably upon this many curb cuts that close together in a very short period of time. That would be my...
And just for clarification, so when the Zoning Commission had this issue before them, they had the option to say, we want a road here, and they chose the option to use that road as part of the site plan approval?
They did, and one other thing, in addition to that, they also said, as part of their deliberations, that when the property to the south is developed, they wanted this curb cut to be used for access to the properties to the south as well. to try to minimize the number of curb cuts onto 10 for that property. So Mr. Wagner is aware of that, and if future plans come in for that property, this curb cut here will be part of that as well. So there'll be a sharing of curb cuts all along this area, which was part of the whole process we talked about in the 10 study.
And just for the record, when the town was approached by Big Y to ask about the easement, since the town has the easement, they first needed to get permission from the International Skating Center, because they also have an easement. So they have agreed.
Before this easement is actually finally signed, they will have the meeting with the skate as well.
But as far as we know, there's no objections to it.
That's correct.
Sean?
Can you just point out where the lights are going to be?
Right here at the driveway to Big Y.
And that's the only light?
That's correct.
So, well, the flow makes sense to me. How's an 18-wheeler going to take a left on Route 10 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
It actually, most likely, these slip deliveries are going to be very early anyway. Typically, we talk to them about sometime 12, 1, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. So typically, these curb cuts are all predetermined, and the radius and the radii on all the curb cuts are predetermined to make those turn safely without crossing the center line on Route 10.
You anticipated my next question, because there's an island there. I can't wait to see how an 18-wheeler turns and doesn't run up on the island.
Yep, that's correct. But there's, again, the radii here were all looked at very carefully by the traffic engineer. They can make those without going onto the island, without going across the center. Okay. That's what we're told.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, so the exit through, yes, that will be maintained shared by Big Y and the skating?
Big Y has agreed in the letter that you have to share in the maintenance of this particular area from here to the area where they would come into it. You should also know, too, if you don't, that other entities have easements through this property now as well. Simsbury, for example, has an easement through there. So there are other large vehicles that go in and out of here all the time. Whether Skating Center likes that or doesn't like that, I'm not prepared to address that tonight, but certainly there are other vehicles that go in and out of there. But the maintenance would be shared, whether it's snow plowing or pavement maintaining or catch basin maintaining. They state in their letter that they're willing to share that.
Thank you.
Good question. The driveway that the general public uses to the skating center now,
Yes.
trucks are going to be coming out of that?
Well, there's a driveway, it's a split drive. There's an entrance, and then there's an exit. And so if public is going to come in that driveway, it would be the entrance to it, and then proceed to the rear of the skating center property. If vehicles are coming out of this, there's a stop bar here, they would proceed out the exit. That's really the only reason that they have to even go on that property. There's really no reason for them to go up into the skating center property at all.
But you're right, the trucks and the cars will be exiting the same road.
So I'm not that great with maps. I mean, are we going to have 18-wheelers with kids going to hockey games in the same vicinity as
Again, I think there are probably, and I don't have the exact number for you with regard to the number of 18-wheelers, but there are probably very few of them, as opposed to other vehicles like small vehicles like bread delivery vans, pastry vans, smaller vehicles as well. But they would use the same exit to get out as well, yes.
You spoke to difference in timing, right?
There is. And Big Y was pretty specific about that. They have no interest in clogging up the traffic. They can't make any time with their deliveries either if it's during peak periods of traffic. So early in the morning, when they make most of their deliveries, they're going to be done and gone.
There's no entrance, no entrance to Big Y from that.
That's
there is
correct.
an exit.
But it would not make any sense for them to come in that way, because if they did come in that way, they'd be approaching the loading dock in the wrong direction. It makes no sense. Their drivers will all know that. They're very carefully instruct their drivers as to how to go in the property, how to exit the property.
And the light that you're talking about, that's the new light that went in?
Yes. No, there's a new one that has not been put in yet.
The new light is over by
Hoskins.
That's farther up.
That's right. That was actually a result of Meadowwood. This one will be the result, basically, of this. DOT required this curb cut to have a light at that intersection.
What is the building across from that curb cut? What's the property there?
Canes is right across the street.
But it's not directly into the Canes parking lot, or it is?
No, it isn't. We tried actually to talk to Mr. Kane about reorganizing his parking. I think it was portrayed a little differently tonight. Tried to talk to him about reorganizing his parking to make it more efficient and to work better with the traffic light that the DOT is requiring. but he elected not to make any changes because he didn't really want to do that. So that's completely up to him. That's a matter of public record.
The DOT did suggest some changes to coordinate the curb cuts so they come out at the same place. So that's what I'm referring to. But if the property owners don't want to do that, they're not required to do that.
Could he do that later at some point if he changed his mind?
He could, but at that point in time, he's going to have to make the application to DOT, which I really think
It's
for a
harder.
small business
So
person,
what
it's hard.
usually you do, and what the Route 10 corridor study showed is that you don't want to have a lot of curb cuts. It's actually more dangerous to have more curb cuts than it is to have a regular traffic flow.
The ideal would have been for him to come out at the light. And whether that could have been worked out or not is a matter of conjecture at this point.
Other questions?
Can you just speak back to, you said there's already an easement for other truck use that's on that, and when does that occur during the day? Is that pretty random, or?
There's no requirement with regard to hours.
Okay.
Those vehicles are fairly large construction vehicles, and they start early, and they can end a little bit late, but they go in and out of here pretty much as they need to. There's an unrestricted easement there.
And how long has that been in place?
Years. I mean, when Cobra owned the property, that's...
The easement came to the town when the skating rink was built because the town, when the developers decided not to build it, they gave the town the land. And so the easement came with the land. So that's how the town received it.
We want to make sure that this shouldn't be used for any additional traffic whatsoever, is maintained fairly, so that's why Big Y agreed to share in the maintenance of that property.
Other questions? Hiram, can you think of any other better traffic plan than that? I mean, I know the zoning commission approved it, but, as we're sitting here tonight trying to second guess all the hours of conversation that they had, I mean, we don't have the benefit of hearing it.
There was a lot of discussion about the parking spaces, the size of the parking spaces, the amount of impervious area. We looked carefully at the circulation that was proposed. And really, given the size of the property, if this weren't a detention basin that was necessary to retain stormwater from not only the skating center but from this site as well, the site could be rearranged. Again, you still run into the same problem with the number of curb cuts being so close together. The DOT would probably look very unfavorably on that. So, bottom line is, Mary, that in my opinion, it's probably the best configuration for traffic circulation that we could expect out of this site.
And just one final question. In terms of time frame, we have no authority over an application, but by the time we're brought in, it's the end of the process. Is there a way that we can involve the Board of Selectmen earlier in the process so that there would be some time for flexibility, as opposed to tonight, the plan's been approved, the Department of Transportation's been approved, and while we may or may not think this is the best traffic flow, we don't have the benefit of all of those hours of public hearing review. So is there a way we can...
I think there's a couple of things. We talked about this possibility in the very early part of the process. There's no question about that. It's not something new. It's not something that was unexpected. But as I explained to somebody that called my office, I said, you really wouldn't paint your house before you bought it. And so there's a certain chronology here that had to take place until the DOT approved this, which since last October they took to do this. There really was no point in them coming forward with this because this is the last item that needs to be done. So now that they have their DOT permit in place, that's really the last thing that needs to be done.
So the local state traffic officials have looked at this and agreed that this is the best traffic flow here.
That's correct. We've talked, town engineers looked at this many times, the state has looked at it, DOT, SDC has looked at it carefully, so we want to make sure that everyone's obviously safe through that
And so
area.
at this point, if it doesn't get approved, it would basically, the application couldn't go forward.
It would necessitate them going back to square one with regard to this whole process. Right? The current plan is, should this application request be approved this evening, they would like to close on the property and begin their site work in August.
So the question is the Big Y going to be built or not? It's been approved by the commissions, but until this piece is finalized, they can't begin construction.
That's right. They won't close until they know that they can do that circulation. That's correct.
Any other questions? Is there a motion before the board? Anyone like to make a motion?
Move that we approve the easement as recommended.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Further questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have to read the resolution into the record?
It's not that, it's just that the final easement is still going to be subject to review by
Thank you,
town
Tom.
council.
I just want to make sure you have that in place.
So, Mr. Esmer, would you make a motion to authorize the first selectman to sign the agreement pending council review?
I do. I authorize, make that motion.
Thank you.
It's been a long day. Very long day.
Any further questions? All in favor? Any questions?
You have a question? I don't have a question.
Any comment?
I just was make a comment.
Going on?
No, I just thought that your comment about bringing us in at the end is awfully hard. Because that would not be my first choice, just to be honest. And I don't do land use. And I'm just trying to decide, it's one of those things where I have to hold my nose and do it, or...
No, I think that's fair, and I'm glad you raised it because, we would like to be involved in the process, and we don't have the benefit of doing that at this point because...
No, and statutorily, we can't.
Right.
Either. It's not like we can...
No, we couldn't have commented on the project itself, but this is something that did come before us, and we would have liked to have had the benefit. So I'll ask Hiram to take a look at our process and see if there's a way to involve the board. At least
I hear you.
let us know early on that this might become an issue so we can weigh in earlier, have more public comment earlier. Good point. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harm.
Next item is to approve the contract for the Hartford Consultants.
I'm going to recuse, Mayor.
Oh, let the record show that Lisa Hefner's leaving the board conflict. I want to thank the subcommittee who've been working on this issue, in addition to myself and Sean from the Board of Selectmen, Emil Dahlquist from Design Review Board, Mike Payne from Planning, Rob Pomeroy from Zoning, Mark Deming from Economic Development, Rich Miller from Conservation, Alan Raphael from EDC, and Kevin North from the Board of Finance have been tasked with looking at this issue. I think Kevin North has asked Paul Hinault to substitute for him. So I do believe Paul's been the one to be involved in the process. I just want to thank the group for working with us. I want to thank the Hartford for being a partner. As we all know, we're very concerned about the future of that campus. They have opted for corporate reasons to sell off parts of their businesses. They have been informing us every step of the way. It's unfortunate that they built the campus in Windsor in 2006 or earlier because they did have an option and they chose to exercise that option. We want to thank the Hartford for not only making us partners but also coming to the table with plans for the future of their campus. They have hired C.B. Richard Ellis. The town participated in the review of that process, and we're grateful to have had a seat at the table. They also are, in addition to the national and international consultants, they've agreed to help fund national consultants to look at the property, to come up with some creative ideas. In fact, we've already spoken to many people who are interested in the campus. We can't tell you who they are, but we've had a lot of interest for some exciting opportunities for the site. And what we have tonight for approval is a contract where the town would enter into a contract with Gateway Planning Group. And we interviewed 3 national and international groups that were very impressive, and it was a very difficult choice to select the Gateway Planning Group. But they have some exciting contacts, they have some exciting clients, they have an exciting resume, and Town Council has put together a contract that the town would enter into. The Hartford would enter into an agreement to pay Gateway $144,990. That's a significant amount of resources. It's a big contract. I think it shows a good faith effort on behalf of the Hartford to not only hire a real estate broker, but to also go above and beyond and hire national and international consultants to market the site. In addition, the town, as part of our budget process, we agreed to contribute $30,000 toward that process. It was important to the Hartford that the town contribute as a partner, even though it's a very small amount of $30,000 compared to the $144,900 they're paying for, just to show that we are partners in this process, and we're very excited about the partnership. Hiram has laid out, in addition to the contract, the public input process. We've had a lot of calls from people who have some great ideas about what should go there. They'd like to talk to the consultants. They'd like to talk about the traffic impact. And Hiram has set forth a very public schedule that will be meeting with the public so that people can have an opportunity to see the site, can have an opportunity to come to the site. The Hartford is opening up their doors to allow us to hold the meetings at the Hartford. So those who have driven by and maybe haven't seen the campus can actually go into the building, can actually see the site and meet with the consultants. The public process will be held September 6th, so it's an important date to put on your calendar. And at this time, I'll ask Hiram to walk us through the highlights of the agreement.
Sure. The schedule for the charrette part of the process, Mary, is in draft form right now. It will start on September. The consultant will be in town starting September 6th. And he'll actually be here through September 12th. There'll be 4 or 5 of those days that'll be actually public input is certainly possible. And as soon as the contract is signed, I'll be able to, and as soon as the Hartford has seen that and agrees to the details of that contract, I'll be able to talk more about the public involvement. But we've set up stakeholder groups. We've set up meetings with many members of the public, homeowners groups, business groups, developers, as well as other community groups that might be interested in development. It's all going to be a very public part of the process. Sort of an exhaustive public part of the process. Actually, they're going to be initially on a Saturday morning, actually one of the same days as Septemberfest takes place. There'll be kind of a keypad polling exercise. There'll be 2 sessions, so people could come either in the morning or in the afternoon, whatever fits their schedule best. And those will probably be a couple hours each where you'll be able to talk about what you visualize in that particular site and how you think the site ought to look in the future. And then there'll be an opportunity for public comment after that as well. The design studio will be open the whole time. People can come in, talk with the design team. They'll be on Monday night, there'll be a public sort of a community open house where you can come in and talk with the entire design team. On Tuesday of that week, there'll be a final presentation for the framework of the plan. The plan will be the output of the charrette. And then ultimately what will happen is after that is done, they'll spend 2 more days here with staff, with town engineer, public works director, and some public officials in terms of talking about the details of how the code should be put together. The code is actually the zoning regulation that would allow what are called entitlements for that property. So some of the people that come to this process that express an interest in, hey, I'd like to do this, I need 100,000 square feet of that property, or I need whatever it happens to be, we'll be able to plug those uses into the code and make sure that if somebody does come forward with a good idea, that would be able to be permitted very, very quickly. So the consultant will be working hard. This is not something that they're new at. They've done this in many places around the country. They've probably written more form-based codes than most other firms. And as Mary said, the 3 that we interviewed were all excellent firms, but we think we're in great stead with Gateway. They're out of Dallas, Texas, if somebody wants to know. We don't have a proclivity necessarily for Texas, but that's
tonight we do.
Turns out to be that case. So that's basically the public process. It's going to be very open, very public, and we welcome anybody's participation in the process. And please, come and make your feelings and thoughts and desires known.
Thanks, Hiram. It's been a lot of work, and thank you for bringing this forward. I know there'll be a website page set up, and I thought maybe we could put the proposal by Gateway on the website, because I think people will be very impressed when they see, as the subcommittee did, all of the great projects that they accomplished. And I don't know if Sean has anything to add. He was on the interview panel, so I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on that.
I mean, overall, I agree. I thought all firms were very strong. I mean, I got to be honest with you, these guys were not my first choice. I understand why the committee picked them. I think that we would have done well with all 3. The biggest thing that these folks had going for them is they were able to meet our very stringent timeline. There was definitely some concerns with the other folks in terms of being able to get this done as quickly as we need to. We can't waste a minute with making sure that we have some vision for this project. I think this is going to be a very different charrette than folks were used to from the downtown. Obviously still tons of public inclusion, but a very different thing. This is a private site that needs to move very rapidly, and again, while we have a seat at the table, it's ultimately the Hartford's decision on what does and doesn't happen here. But they're very willing to hear public comment and public support, and again, they've been very good partners to us, and no reason why they won't continue to do that. So, but again, it is a very different process this time, again, because we're dealing with the private landowner. One question I had on the contract, obviously we agreed to the $30,000 as we budgeted for. That 17%, of the hourly is inclusive
Yes.
in the 30%?
Yeah.
Yes,
So
that's
there's
it.
no over and above, there's a
No.
contingency? if
The
there-
Board of Selectmen authorized 30,000, so
Right.
that's the amount that we'll work within.
And I know there's some wording in the contract that would lead you to believe that, but I've made it very clear to Gateway, that's it. There is no more.
Right. And just one more point, they seem to have very interesting national connections.
Yes.
Which was definitely a strong factor for these folks. Again, not that the other folks weren't very good, but this is a unique piece of property. It's 640 whatever thousand square, 640, 100,000 square feet. Big thing. This is not. Doesn't get done in the walls of Connecticut. That gets done nationally. So it was important to get somebody with some vision and some perspective from the national basis. So I think that's why it ultimately does make sense to probably go with these folks in the long term. So.
Good point. Thank you. Any other questions on the contract?
Just a comment.
Yes.
I just wanted to thank you, Mary, and thank you, Sean and Hiram, for really making that commitment to having the public included in this process. I think there's been a lot of conversation about what's going to happen with that property, and I think it's every opportunity that we have to include the public in that discussion is critical. So.
We're making two. I just wanted to point out, Jen, thank you very much. I'd like to point out that some of the team members will actually be down around Septemberfest when that's going on. And one of the things that I'm working on now is having them have a big badge that says, "Ask me about the Hartford." And we want to get people to come down and participate in that process. So if you see them walking around with that or some silly hat on or whatever we come up with in the meantime, that's what that's about. So in addition to the website, the blog, all kinds of posters around town, we'll have whatever way we can think of, SCTV, of course, to try to get the public involved in this process.
And as soon as, when do you expect the dates and the times to be finalized, Hiram? So we
Well, I got a draft, yeah, within the week,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. So we'll
Yep.
start to advertise.
So you need a motion?
We do. We need a motion.
To authorize the first selectman to enter into a contract with Gateway Planning for purposes of the Hartford property charrette.
The only thing I would suggest is subject to the town attorney.
Subject to town attorney's final approval, as always.
Second. Any further questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll allow Mrs. Hebner to come back. Great.
Thank you, Hiram.
Thanks, Hiram. Next item is a use of the Terriffill Green. I think what I'll do is at 9 o'clock, I'll let the board take a quick recess. If that's acceptable to everybody, just so you know our time frame.
For a family break?
Company. Next item is to approve the use of the Terriffill Green on Main Street, Terriffill, for a youth and family community picnic on Sunday, September 8th, for the hours of 10 and 2 p.m. The church will be going through the regular public gathering permit to make sure all required insurance requirements and other requirements are put in place. But we're glad that the green is completed and that the public is using it. That was what it was intended for. So, any questions? Can I have a motion to approve? Have a tie?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item is to approve the new fee schedule for the Simsbury Farms Ice Skating Rink as recommended by the Culture Parks and Rec Commission in July, and they were looking ahead to ice and ice time, and Mr. Bush is here. Thank you for being here this evening. I don't know if you want to walk the board through fee schedule, but I'm sure this is designed to cover the costs and to make sure that you show positive revenue.
Good evening, David Bush, Chairman Park and Rec. You've already been here a long time, so I'm going to leave this as, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I'll let you guys get home before midnight.
Great. Any questions? This is routine. Thank you to you and Parks and Rec Commission for reviewing the fees on an annual basis, and we try to keep our costs down, but we obviously have to make sure.
The one note I'd make is that we actually picked these rates. They will cover the anticipated increase in cost by a few $100s. So we tried to match that with the local rates, and we ask you approve it. We looked at the history as indicated in your information. So just another year.
Thank you.
I just have one.
Lisa and then Sean.
Just a quick question. Thank you for your work on this. These look fine. I just had one question under season passes. It says additional 15 to 20, and then you thought that would be an increased revenue of 200. Is that, but there wasn't an increased revenue for the other stuff? I just wasn't sure of how to read that chart. If you could walk me through that.
All right, and let me also make sure that you and I are looking at the same chart.
Okay.
As I am pinch hitting this evening. May I just
You
grab
want me to take that one for you? I think it's the total of all three, Lisa.
It's the total of all three?
Yeah, I think each, I think. it's- I
Each
think it-
section.
So that one is the total of all three family pass increases, and then the daily fees resident and non-resident is the total of both of those. So the additional revenue from those line items, I think.
So it looks like we got to get more people to buy season passes for this game.
Right, that was the thing that sort of
Keep up the
struck
cold
me.
weather, and we will. You know, the warm weather that killed us a little bit, so.
Okay, so that's for the,
Yes.
all three, okay, that was my question.
Any other questions?
Just to,
Can I motion to approve?
just to point out that this isn't an income-producing thing. This is to cover your anticipated future costs, as you noted.
This is not an income-producing event.
Right.
This is,
Just like to make sure that the record
keep the
clearly
losses down
reflects
to a
that.
minimum.
Right.
Great.
Appreciate your work on that.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve the fees?
Move that.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you,
Dave.
Deb.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks, board.
One final item, and then we'll take a quick recess before we do transfers. We've received a request from the Board of Finance to transfer $200,000 from the Board of Finance Reserve Fund to increase the fund balance to the Town of Simsbury pension fund. I think this was discussed by the Board of Finance, and we've made some adjustments earlier to address the pension funds. They include the board's adoption of a defined contribution plan in some of our contracts, so thank you to the board for that, and that should have a favorable result for our taxpayers. We also made additional changes to employee contributions as we settled our contracts, which will also factor in to the town's pension funds. I think the question was raised earlier. I think, Lisa, you asked if this had been reviewed by the pension subcommittee.
Formally, I know that we discussed it in principle. I know that we've been told that there were some members that thought that this was a good idea, and I actually think it may be a good idea too. But I don't think we formally had it as an agenda.
Well, I asked Mary Ann, so I just get clarification
Yeah.
from Mary Ann. We didn't get a formal vote on this recommendation from the pension subcommittee, have we?
We did not get that.
We did not get
That
that.
is something that's not gone before the pension subcommittee.
Okay.
This came up in June, and the pension subcommittee has not met since.
Okay.
before that.
Question, since starting this fiscal year, it would apply to this fiscal year, not last year's fiscal year?
Actually, it's from the fiscal year 2013 reserves, and they have the funds in their reserve fund for $200,000 to be applied retroactively to 2013, so that it will offset future payments of the town into the funds for the
And
board.
would there be any harm in delaying till our next meeting so that the pension subcommittee could take a look at this and send a formal recommendation?
I can pass that on to the Board of Finance, that this would be looked at the September meeting.
Yeah. Do you anticipate any problems
I do
given the
not.
timeframe? Okay.
No.
Sean?
Doesn't that mean we can't close the books?
It means we can't close the books.
Right, which is.
That's why I asked the question. Is it applied to
We're
this year?
closing August 31st. Actually, we're closing out purchase orders August 31st. We're in the process of actually closing the fiscal year right now, and that's why I'm before you again this
So
month.
this would apply to last fiscal year?
Yes, it
And
would.
that's what the intent.
We could.
Why wasn't this done earlier, recommendations come forward earlier? Because we could have
I
considered
think-
this as part of the budget process, or we could have considered it, at an earlier board.
What they were looking at is how they were going to fund it, and because they had the pension subcommittee drop our interest rate assumption from 7 3/4 to 7%, our unfunded liability is going up. And the town needed, they felt that they could give us something at the end of the fiscal year, and they have made it. Last month I was here for the capital non-recurring, and this month I'm here for this one. They had money left over in their reserve fund, and they felt that this was the best use of these funds when we were looking at it.
But these are reserves that could offset, you can use reserves for a lot of things. You could lower the mill rate, you can use it for a lot of things. So the question was, why wasn't this raised earlier so we could have considered it as part of the budget process, or we could have acted on it earlier?
They didn't take that at matter. They had mentioned it to us originally back in budget time, but it came up because they felt that this, in future years out, for us to subsidize our pension plan, it would help reduce our expenses. So, and it would, in the end, reduce the tax implications in future years out.
Could you give us numbers on that? So what is our current funding levels, and this influx of money, what will that do to those funding levels?
It doesn't make a lot. It doesn't make a lot in the current year. when we go into the new plan, I'd have to go back and pull our records, but we're under 80% in 2 of our plans, and we're under 70% in 1 of our plans. And those numbers will go down even further because we're going to the 7% interest rate assumption.
Right.
They will go up as we keep making our payments, annual required contributions to the plan.
And they'll go up if we do this influx, but the question I guess I'm asking is how much?
It's going to barely move it up maybe 1/10, maybe 2/10. Our plans are quite large. I mean.
So what is the thinking of doing this?
It's just to help offset for the next year. I've talked to Ms. Seelman at Milliman, and she said that this would be an offset.
Would be an offset?
Yes.
So we would see savings in the following year?
We would see some savings in the following year.
So in terms of budget impact, it would have some minimal budget impact for next fiscal year.
Right.
And do you have the final number on the fund balance so that we can report to, like, the town's of fund balance?
For the town? Yes, our fund balance, even with making these transfers, and I'm asking you to make a few tonight, our fund balance is going to increase this year. We had FWHA funds finally came in. That was $422,000 this year that came in. We received another $147,000 from a very old HUD grant through the library. Those are 2 big grants. It's over $600,000 that we collected in 2013. The last storm in February was another $100,000 grant that the town will be receiving. So and our tax revenues are up. Also, we've collected in our supplemental bills. So we are actually doing quite well, and the increase we're looking at is close to $300,000.
So what would the percent of the fund balance be before and after this transfer?
Before it would be a little bit higher. It's around 11% right now, unassigned.
So to keep our fund, to keep our AAA bond rating, it has to be between
10 and 15%.
So, so the question is setting the mill rate and make sure you don't overtax. And make sure.
Correct. And we try to do that. But this year, you understand that we're going off of the governor's budget, which was much more harsh to the town of Simsbury. So we had to reduce our costs off the governor's budget. So anything that we get in addition from the governor's budget, from the legislature, will go back into our general fund.
So we expect to have additional fund balance as a result of
at the end of the year, right. But not at this point in time. We don't know what that's going to be.
Other questions?
Yeah. I know that there were potentially some additional security-related costs that may be coming down the line from the security audit of both the schools and the town. And I know it's referenced in the minutes, but I just want to make sure we have enough money to meet those needs without depleting the reserve to the point where it would affect the bond rating.
The Board of Finance in December or January or February, Board of Finance gave $254,000 for school and town security measures. We are using those funds. The Board of Ed got $177,000 and the town got $77,600.
So that was for the initial locks, but I think they're anticipating there may be some other recommendations.
There may be, but that would probably be going to a bond issue at this point. If it's higher than what they anticipated. This year, when you were doing the capitals, $400,000 is coming from the general fund to pay for capital projects. And that's for the town office building, the town teledata, and the emergency generators, the completion of those 3 projects. So we did approve that.
The other point I want to make is I do appreciate the need to take a hard look at our pensions, and I'm really proud of the job the pension committee did on that, reducing the assumptions, and makes it more transparent and more properly funded. So I do see a need of accelerating the funding rate down the line. But I do want to point out that this is almost 1%. This is more than 1% of our budget. We put in 190 when we reduced the pension assumption, so this is another 200. So it's almost $390,000. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I was just surprised by the timing of it, and I would just hope in the future that, we're going to vote tonight about expanding the role of the pension committee, and I think it would be appropriate. The reason we set up the pension committee is to meet the charter requirement that we consult with the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, and so it should, I would just respectfully request that we follow a procedure so that there's adequate time to vet and public audience. And
would you like to make that a motion to approve the funding with the request that the time frame to reviewing pension transfers be done through the pension subcommittee
in the future?
In the future.
Do we need to do two separate motions? Because we have to do this motion, which I don't want to impede the closing of the books, and it is something.
I would do you want to make that motion, and then we'll have comments?
I just had a question. Is it possible that the pension subcommittee could have a special meeting to address this in order to allow us to work through this and then close the books?
Yeah, I think the problem is the time frame that people are on vacation, and if I don't know if you can get a quorum.
Moira's laughing at me.
And plus Tom will have a coronary.
I mean, I will say
it's a good suggestion, but I think that practically, given the time frame.
We could ask them to delay it, or they can vote and.
But it's not a bad thing. I think that Lisa's points are well taken. I mean, we're not spending money. We're taking our savings and putting it into another savings for. Correct. But I think the point is well taken that we have a pension subcommittee that's made up of members of all boards, and that is a great place to review this and bring it forward during the budget process. Because 1% of the budget is a big number.
It's a big number, and you know, with the Board of Finance did put a cap, or not a cap, a guideline on us, and this, had this been part of the budget process, would have been quite a bit above the guideline that they themselves set. Again, I still think it's a good idea to accelerate the funding rate and be responsible to our town employees, so I'm not against it, and we do have the reserves, and it's not going to deplete it to the point where we compromise security improvements that we may want to do once we get the results, and it's not going to deplete the reserves to the point where we compromise the AAA. So, but again, and Nancy's point is well taken. It's just nice to have the deliberative process that we set up.
Plus, we introduced some savings to save money in the pension plan. So it would be nice to know, in evaluating this proposal, how the increased payments, how the defined contribution option, how that's all going to save us money. Maybe we might need to invest less as we go forward and have some of those savings as well. Sean?
Just, I think, two things of clarity. One, I think they did dance around this issue during the budgetary process, and they gave us a guideline, not a cap.
Yeah,
they're very careful about telling us which is the difference.
I corrected
Trust
it.
me. And the other piece is, again, my biggest concern is when I read the AAA bond reaffirmation, it did note that pension liabilities are one of the things that can take away your AAA rating. And while we're not in danger of that, when we dip below 80%, again, in my world, that gets scary from a fiduciary underwriting standpoint. So I think we're very prudent to be investing these additional dollars in our pension liability. So
there is
again, I agree with the process.
Yeah, there is a committee, and it would be helpful to have the endorsement of the committee. I think that's a good point well taken.
But given the time frame today, I'm not going to object to doing this one time, but in the future, I would request that they go through the pension subcommittee.
I will second that motion.
Oh, well, I'll make that motion then.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll come back and do transfers. So stay tuned.
So exciting.
All right. We're going to keep going forever, right?
Do you have any food? It was nice to have you in the audience. Yeah, come back with some pizza.
What? You're on a mall run. You're on a mall run. I need to go on a mall run.
Oh, I need to go on a mall run.
We need to all go on a mall run tomorrow. We drop everything. Bye. Thanks for coming, Kath.
Good night.
Good night.
I like your addition, by the way.
So we're not.
Okay. I know we're on. Are we still? We're not really off the air, are we? I wrote it down.
That's exactly the image I had.
Surfing.
That's precisely what I had. How much more do we have?
We got a. Do we not have a lot left? No. Heritage.
We've got a lot of personnel, but we're gonna zip through it, right, Moira? Above zero. Only to be considered, above zero, only to be considered in case of.
Yeah, it's gonna be a terrible headline.
What's that?
You want me to rewrite that?
No, it is what it is. A 0.5% cash payment for employees receiving the forms and view in the unsatisfactory range. So, I mean, once you read it, you're giving an employee who's got unsatisfactory review cash. I know.
Well, no. Give money for increasing the OPEB contribution.
So I just think.
Huh? Can you reword that to say that it's
Right.
You guys understand how much?
No, we're talking about the unaffiliated.
Oh, you lost your little thingy, Bob. Where'd it go? Did you not have one of those?
No.
Oh.
It was like that.
You hear us upstairs?
No, we're talking
Feelings. No.
unaffiliated employees.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I'm mistaken. I thought you were talking about something else.
No, and I just don't like that they're getting unsatisfactory.
Do you know what I mean? Because yeah.
It's probably better than it's not descriptive. Mary's family just come back.
Are they going somewhere? Where are they going?
Where were they? Are they coming or going?
Golfing. They were golfing.
Oh,
I thought they were
leaving
for weeks.
I know.
No, they thought that I'd be done and we could go out for ice cream.
Well, we can be.
Yeah, let's be done.
And thanks, yeah. The chocolate chip.
So go out without me. I know. So. Yeah, we're gonna whip right through the rest of it.
I have to recuse myself from the pension subcommittee thing here. Mass Mutual Connection.
Pension subcommittee?
The expansion of the duties.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, we'll put it on the record so you
Yeah.
All right.
Where's Sean?
Sean!
Sean, not that Sean.
No, not you. Sorry.
Now playing the part of Sean. Sean. What is he doing out there?
Yeah, I heard that cat.
Heard that cat? Is that what you said?
I'm sorry, I had a younger. I had a passion for
Chop, chop.
All right.
At least I have that.
Originally.
When are you officially empty nesting it? Thursday? Really?
This Thursday?
This Thursday.
Oh, Lise.
We having a party?
No.
Yeah.
Just say the word.
Rent
Are
a
you
kid?
really? So you are having a party.
Party at Lisa's house.
Party at Lisa's house.
Kids are gone.
The house is such a mess. I was just packing.
Oh,
It's
right.
like-
Oh, yeah.
We come
We'll
back,
move
Lisa.
on to our agenda. First item is supplemental year-end transfers. If you review
safe.
the memo from Mary Ann, it's here tonight, there's, in preparing the documents, the closing of the books, there are some intra-departmental transfers. So these are funds that were in the departments that needed to be transferred because of purchase orders that were outstanding. So in those interdepartment transfers, there's no no Board of Finance approval necessary. In the interdepartmental transfers, there's some funding that Marion's recommending that we make to cover last-minute bills in some of those accounts that are coming out of other funds that were available in the other accounts. And then finally, the Animal Control Fund, because of a change in insurance option coverage, has increased. It was anticipated $5,000 less. So because of insurance change, that will show a $5,000 differential that needs to be funded. So that's the only reserve fund transfer. So any questions on any of the transfers?
Mine's a silly question. I'll let Sean go first.
So, we already did a bunch.
We did.
Are these, is this it? Or are we gonna do this again?
Marianne?
Come back, and that's why you see like a lot of really tiny ones. I don't want to hear from the auditors in November, well, you got $5, that's in the wrong spot. I just said I'm covering them all, so that's why I came back again.
And a lot of these, I asked Marianne to look at changes in some internal policies for next year. What happened was a lot of the department heads put in purchase orders for one thing and then decided at the year end because of tree removal or something that they'd rather change the purchase order for a different item than do what they originally thought they were going to do. So a lot of those are just internal decisions that the department heads made, but we're trying to improve some internal controls so that those POs aren't put in and encumbered by the time we report to the Board of Selectmen and then changed after the Board of Selectmen. Because this last meeting should have been our last cleanup, and because of changes the department heads made, we're back again. But we're going to try to figure out a way to lock the department heads out of the system earlier so they can have those conversations with the finance department earlier, so it doesn't result in these conversations.
Okay, and I had one other question. Special programs, contractual services, that 19.8. Remind me again what special programs, contractual services was? Is that the cutting?
Item number 4
Yeah.
in your memo. Farms complex.
Oh, that is the programs in the special farm, in the Simsbury Farms complex. They actually, because of the weather and last year, they had less participation, so they didn't hire as many contractors. That's what that was. It's the programs, this camp stuff to do, camp, whatever.
Those are variable depending on the year and the enrollment.
I just didn't know if it was the other special contractors that we have for grass cutting and trimming and all those other things, because that seemed odd to me. that we're cutting back on that, right? Thank you.
That's another one.
No.
Move to approve the
Thank you.
transfers as recommended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is approve expansion of pension subcommittee duties, and I think we have
Yes, I have to recuse myself. Yes, thank you.
so the record will reflect that Nancy's leaving the conversation because of a conflict. So this item is before us, and thank you, Tom, for bringing it forward to expand the role of the pension subcommittee, which I think has been working very well. It's a great working group that takes a look at our plans and our investment offerings. This is the existing 457 and its new 401A defined contribution plan. And because this is a new program, we'd like the pension subcommittee to also take a look at that as well. Any questions? Can I have a motion to approve?
Move we approve the recommended increases in scope to the pension subcommittee and rename it to the retirement plan subcommittee as outlined in the memo.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is
Nancy.
All
right then.
Forgot to invite her back.
Don't give her a sugar cookie.
Get in here.
Run. God. The next item is approving the naming rights policy. Thanks to the board for their suggestions. And I think this will serve us well as we go forward in recognizing folks who deserve to be recognized by naming certain items, but also giving the public an opportunity to comment on whether they feel that the naming policy is appropriate. So any questions on the process? I think, Tom, you incorporated all the comments and recommendations from the last meeting.
Yes, and there's the policy referenced a form for folks to fill out when they want to make a recommendation, and that's drafted. Please don't make me write this again.
So just for the public's notice, if you have an idea of something you would like to name after someone, there's now a form that will have to be reviewed, and there's a process to go forward and before it comes to the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education. I think it's a good idea. It's a great way to go forward. It puts everybody on notice of what the intent is.
I have a comment. Tom, thank you for your work on this. I just wanted to clarify under the monetary valuation of naming rights, something that we talked about, that that there are parameters on what the monetary contribution would look like, so that someone doesn't say, you know, I'm making a $10 donation and therefore I get a street named after me. So just to make sure that that is clear somewhere.
And you're right, Shannon, that's addressed on page 5, and the purpose of that section 4 there on page 5 is to make sure that that exactly that doesn't happen, so that any proposed contribution is commensurate with the requested name.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Any other, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item is consideration of request from Charles Houlihan to waive a land use fee. Ordinarily, I think the town is very careful about waiving fees. I think the only fee waiver that this board has considered was a fee before the Zoning Board of Appeals when property owners had some concerns about the development on Sand Hill, and we did waive that fee. Bringing this forward, it was a request by Mr. Houlihan on behalf of the Redstone Pub, and I'm bringing it forward at his request. Mr. Lebekin had asked for a freestanding sign. Under the town Simsbury Center regulations, which had public hearing and a lot of input, the town regulations do not allow freestanding signs. So the sign that Mr. Lebekin wanted to put in is not allowed under the code. Mr. Lebekin is allowed, and Redstone is allowed, to put a sign off of the building. That is what is allowed in the code. And freestanding signs are allowed on Route 10, but they're not allowed on the perpendicular streetways because of the walkability issues. So what Mr. Lebekin wanted and requested from the town, he was denied under the regulations. And in order to accommodate a local businessman and to support our local businesses, we asked town council to meet with Mr. Lebekin to explain the process that he could follow. Under the regulations, he could follow a zone change or a text amendment. So Mr. Lebekin did file for a zone change. The zoning commission did deny that zone change. He then asked him to come back and they would take a look at a text amendment. Because this is the first zone change under the new regulations, Mr. Houlihan felt that the town needed to be flexible as they look at regulations and as they accommodate local business folks. So that is why it's before us, and I'd asked the board if they had any questions.
What exactly, I mean, how much is he asking for here?
So he has paid $1,250 for both the zone change and the text amendment.
Right. And he says he's requesting a refund, a portion of the fee.
Correct.
What portion is he looking for?
This is the only letter that we've received. I don't know. I think he's, they would appreciate any offset. One suggestion I did have, since this is going before the zoning commission, we could refer this to the zoning commission, and when they take up the application, we could ask for their input as to what they would recommend and send it back to us. The Board of Selectmen is the only legislative body that can waive fees.
Understood.
But I think it's certainly appropriate if the board wants. You certainly can act on this tonight, or if you wanted to get input from the zoning commission as to whether, because this is the first zone change challenge under the new regulations, whether they feel special consideration should be given.
So he's back before zoning for a text amendment
He
at
is.
this point?
Yes.
So
correct. Which may or may not be denied.
May or may not work.
Correct.
Again, and then Interesting, because obviously we've got staff time here, we've got town attorney time, so
Exactly.
there is cost on the town side to
There
do
is.
all this.
There is.
But
And there is, I think you look at both sides. The town invested a lot of time and public hearings on the regulations, which said very clearly we don't want to allow freestanding signs. That's what the zoning commission wants. That's what the regulations say. If they choose to allow a text amendment, that's within their right, and if they don't, they don't. So because this is, again, the first time it's come before them, it may make sense to send this back to zoning. When they consider the application, they would also consider whether there should be consideration on the fees.
can they?
They can.
They can make a
Yeah, they
recommendation,
can make a
but not
recommendation.
binding.
They have to come back to the Board of Selectmen. Question?
The only fee waiver that I remember us doing, I didn't think we approved that. They requested it, but we didn't grant it.
I'll ask for clarification. The Sand Hill permit, I think we did grant it.
We definitely talked about it.
Yeah, I'll double
No, I
check.
didn't.
I believe we did. I don't remember. I'll double check. I believe that was before us.
I think we did.
I think we did. But I'll double check on that.
It just, from reading through this, it sounds as if he went for the zone change, and then it was suggested the text amendment. So it wasn't that he understood he could do both at the same time, that he went for one.
Yeah, I
and then
did send this by town council. The town doesn't advise council on how to pursue an application. We can't do that. So there was a lot of conversation. I think that their recollection is they thought they were advised to seek a zone change. Because this is a confusing issue, there was options, but I think they interpreted it as they should do a zone change. But council was in the room and town staff were in the room, and there were all options laid out.
Okay.
There is some confusion. I don't want to say Mr. Houlihan heard it one way or another, but
right.
Town council did suggest that he could put a sign up tomorrow, which is allowed as a right, or have to come in. There's a lot of different options as to how you would get the regulation changed. One is a zone change, one is a text amendment.
Yeah.
But there is confusion. This is the first time that the commission has acted on the sign regulation under the new code.
Yeah.
I think there's a desire to be flexible with the business owner, but there was a lot of time put into the regulations, and the commission may decide that they want to enforce the regulation. Our job was to try to explain the process by which the applicant could take, and that's why we brought town council in to do that.
Yeah, I know it's late and Hiram's probably on his way home. It would have been, a good conversation to have with him as well. Just trying
There's
to
a
gain
lot of letters back and forth advising what your options were in addition to town council.
Yeah.
Mary, my only concern here is what kind of precedent are we going to set?
Exactly.
Exactly. Again, my heart goes out to Mark. Obviously, I don't want him to spend this money for a negative result, but because he got a negative result, doesn't necessarily mean the town should give him money back. And I get that that's frustrating. There's a lot of negative results that come through the land use process. I would be comfortable sending it back to zoning and having their opinion. To give us some better guidance on how we would do this.
Yeah.
And then again, maybe from either Hiram or town council on how do we do this so that we're not setting the precedent.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think everybody feels uncomfortable waiving fees.
Yeah.
And so a process to do that. And I did ask town council what I could represent to the board tonight in terms of a recommendation. And town attorney said, because it's a fee waiver request, it has to go on the Board of Selectmen agenda.
Yep.
But he said the only consideration that makes this different from other applications is it is the first time that the new regulations have been reviewed in terms of a sign. So there was certainly some consideration that made it worth having a conversation. So I think the suggestion to send it back to zoning, to have them evaluate, is there something the town could do to avoid further confusion for local businesses? Mm-hmm. I think it was very clear that what Mark is asking for is not allowed. So the direct answer is, when he came in and said, I want a freestanding sign, the answer is no. Is there a process by which maybe we can clarify so that there's a box checked? We're working on that, but clearly what he's asking for is not allowed.
And never has been,
And
right?
never has been.
Yeah, so it's not like this is something new.
No, and that's why I think-
The whole thing with Arts Exclusive, where they have their
Exactly.
sign there.
And even the blade
Exactly.
signs that they've done
Exactly.
as an accommodation to the side streets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The side streets are designed to be walkable and friendly, and not to be littered, as you will, with freestanding signs. The freestanding signs were relegated to Route 10 because that's where the traffic was going quicker, and that's where they needed to be. So, I think the suggestion to have the zoning commission decide whether they felt the regulations were clear and their direction, again, this was before them, not before us.
Yeah.
So was their direction sufficiently clear that they should not that we should not entertain a waiver, or was there enough confusion that they would recommend some portion be refunded? I think that's the question. It's not a question of should we waive the fees based on whether he got a good result or not.
Absolutely
I think
not.
the question is, was there any confusion in the conversations between the commission and the applicant to have the town bear some of that burden?
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
my thoughts center around that 690 on the zone change in particular,
Yes.
especially if you get to go on the text amendment route.
Exactly.
That's probably what we want them to comment on.
Exactly.
If they wanted some guidance, so.
Okay.
Yeah, can we
Yes.
also get history on what other boards of selectmen have waived in the past? It'd be useful to see what things.
They've been on here for.
Yeah, I think what I can do is, that would be really hard to do. I think what we'll do is we'll go the term of this Board of Selectmen and anything Hiram can remember. Because I think, to check the records
And just
going
have
back, I'm not sure we know. But
Bobby-
we'll do what we can.
Bobby, go through criteria that we should consider
Yeah.
when we're considering a waiver.
I think the points the board made is we don't waive fees. The question, I think, for the referral to zoning was there any confusion throughout the process that requires some consideration? The board comfortable with that?
Yeah. To your point of it moving forward, just looking at this being anew, is there something that we can take away from
Yes.
it to better
Yep.
as well?
Good point. Okay. All right, can I have a motion to refer to zoning?
Move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Just a reminder, the Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day, say that 3 times real fast. It will be Saturday, August 17th at the Public Works Garage on Town Forest Road from 8 to noon. This is a collection that's being taken by Simsbury, so unlike our other regional collections, this one is not open to the non-towns that are participating, so it's strictly Simsbury. And I think it's Canton and Granby, but not the MDC towns.
No, the significant thing is that when we were part of the MDC collection, residents from our towns could go to other MDC collections.
Right.
And that is not possible.
Right. So just a reminder. So go in your basement and find all your household hazardous waste. Just a quick update. We did receive a distribution check in the amount of $6,738. The Board of Education also received a check. This is great because it shows that our liability programs are strong, and towns that have a good program did get a reimbursement, and that money does go into our general fund. And so I know Sean Kimball left, but as a risk manager, he's put into place a lot of checks and balances that allow us to get some money back for our residents. Finally, thank you, Rich, for staying, and for some of you who stayed. This senior center is back on our agenda. It's not for voting tonight, but we did want to keep it moving, and I wanted Rich to share some of the information that some of the questions that were raised in our earlier meeting, some of the conversation from a previous meeting with town staff, and recommended next steps. So, Rich, thanks for staying.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll just kind of briefly review where we were last month at your meeting in July. You set a schedule where we would meet with architect and staff and develop some information in response to questions and comments at the July meeting. And that's where we are tonight. And hopefully we'll move in the direction of decision by your board in September as to site location and perhaps some additional public information sessions if you seem that that's desirable. I'll just very briefly go through this and hit a couple high points. One of the questions that was asked was the population and users. Social services and senior center staff have put together those numbers. I think what's significant is there are some 975 unduplicated users. You saw some daily figures before, and you asked, well, how many people, individual people, really are using the facility? And there are some 975 folks that do that. However, even counting repeat users in different programs, there is a fairly high average daily use of 144 people on average per day. And I did include a couple program sheets with your package so you can get an idea as to the activities at the center. It's interesting to note that in our needs assessment and program study, the peak 55 and older population is expected to occur out in the time period in the years 2025 to 2030. So we are looking at about a 30% increase in that age category. So I think it is a good expectation that uses at the senior center would increase. And of course, our needs assessment program and space requirement did in fact target that projected growth. There were some questions about aquifers and wetlands, both at a potential new facility site at the corner of Bushy Hill and Stratton Brook, as well as a facility at the Performing Arts Center. The Stratton Brook Bushy Hill site is very close to the far eastern end of the Stratton Aquifer. It's interesting that on that site that was looked at, the surface drainage actually does not go towards the aquifer, and water, of course, would not be drawn out of that site because there's public water available and also public sewer. However, we would expect that there'd be a lot of environmental questions. There would be extra costs associated with environmental impact statements, as well as a lot of specialty designs on handling the surface runoff. So there would be a number of questions and extra costs, I feel, associated with that site. The Performing Arts Center site is actually out of the wetlands and floodplains, and that site would only be subject to what's called an upland review permit because it's near the wetlands. That site is also served by public water and sewer. As far as priority needs, the senior center staff had identified a number of those, and they in fact also identified the 4 top priorities which are in your package, and those are additional parking, a large multi-purpose room, a large fitness room, and much better accessibility to the building. So those are some of the things we would try to target in our designs. In terms of the parking, right now there's 37 spaces available on the Eno Memorial site. Obviously there's a lot of additional parking on street in the Iron Horse Boulevard lots and adjacent business lots on somewhat of a limited basis, but everyone has been very cooperative with parking. During active program times, such as the luncheons and some of the larger programs, we are using all the spaces. One of the things we looked at in our initial study was the possibility of a parking deck, including expansion of that structure onto adjacent properties. If that were to be done, it would indeed come pretty close to meeting those parking requirements. However, we had very much expected to get a grant for that deck, and that has not been forthcoming. So we did go back and take a closer look at the site, and it is interesting that with a retaining wall, we could pick up another 17 to 20 spaces on the site. And one of the things our architect had mentioned, and in fact what is done in some towns, is the possibility of a shuttle service for folks parking in the Iron Horse Boulevard lots during large events. So that option is always available. One of the things that evolved in our discussions was the possibility of putting a split facility in place. And that means that all of the core senior center activities would remain at Eno, but some of the other community programs that also occur at Eno, as well as certain what I will call standalone senior center programs, could actually happen at the Performing Arts Center with a small addition. Obviously, the Performing Arts Center, when there are not large activities going on down there, has a lot of parking, and it does have really the exciting possibility of a lot of shared uses in a multi-use type room, both for community activities, certain senior activities, primarily some of the larger special exercise programs, which are actually run by professional services, so it doesn't involve senior center staff, as well as the Performing Arts Center in terms of green room, something we've looked for some time. A green room would need some changing rooms, some bathrooms. Again, the very type of things that some of the more involved physical activities for the senior center would also desire. So that's kind of an interesting development. I believe in your package there should be a letter from the Performing Arts Center Board. I did a brief presentation with them, and they were very enthusiastic about a shared facility. One of the other questions that came up was operational costs. I took a look at those in 3 different scenarios. We do have very good baseline numbers for what it costs to run our buildings. If you were to do the full build-out, as shown in the study, you'd probably be looking at around $60,000 a year for full utility and maintenance costs. That would be in a brand-new building.
Is that above what we already pay, or?
Yeah, that would be for a whole new building, if you put a new facility, and that's about what it costs to operate a building of that size. If you were doing a full expansion at Eno, you're probably looking at around $22,000 a year. The reason that number is lower is, interestingly enough, Eno has some very efficient heating and electrical systems in place. If we did a phased program at Eno, which I'll talk about in a minute, we're probably looking at around $10,000 to $11,000 a year just to pay for the additional heating, air conditioning, and lighting. As far as staffing, as you probably know from your budget deliberations, the Building and Grounds Division of Public Works really needs some additional staffing for its overall operations as is. It would be my estimation in a whole new building, you'd probably need 1 more full-time person. A full construction program at Eno would probably require about a half-time person, which could be shared with other facilities. And if we looked at the phased construction, you probably would be able to get away without any staff immediately. One of the things that is hard to predict is how many folks would make themselves use the facility and avail themselves of the program. So it's a little difficult to predict what the senior center staffing would be. That's very dependent on users. It's also dependent on which programs use contract providers with fees. So that, I did not include that. It's difficult to predict. I mentioned the phase program. This very much ties in with putting some facilities at the Performing Arts Center. It also includes the relocation of SCTV from Eno, which opens up a substantial amount of space at no structural changes. The original lower level where SCTV was, in fact, one big multi-purpose room. That could be renovated with a new kitchen facility, and therefore that multi-purpose room could be used for larger dining groups, especially at the luncheons, as well as other, by dividing the room, other senior center uses as well as community uses. In those initial phases, we could look at the retaining wall along Railroad Street rather than a parking deck, and that saves you $1 million right off the top. I developed some possible phases. If you looked at a phase construction, phase 1, of course, would be to relocate SCTV, renovate the spaces I mentioned for a new kitchen and dining room, which would have a lot of other multi-purpose uses. A new entry drop-off. That definitely has been a challenge at Eno. I think it can be addressed in a fairly elegant manner. And then a considerably scaled back addition for physical fitness, bathrooms, health screening, and a little more private offices for the social services operations. The second stage would be the multi-purpose room at the Performing Arts Center. Third stage would be the retaining wall for parking. Fourth stage, obviously, if the space needs developed, you put another addition onto Eno. And then, of course, if usage really picks up, you could take a look at the parking deck, especially in conjunction with other center area activities. parking deck has been discussed in the center area charrette, so that would fit in nicely as different opportunities develop. As far as your next steps go, one of the things, in fact, I perhaps rushed ahead a little bit with the architect, and that is, before we spend any money, we'd like to talk to the State Historic Preservation Office to see what their opinions are on some changes at Eno. Eno is listed on the National Register, so we would have to be very respectful of the historic integrity of Eno and make sure that anything we do there is compatible with the historic nature of the building. If you decide to proceed with the Eno Memorial option or options, we would probably want to have some further discussions with the Performing Arts Center and then get the opinion from the State Historic Office as well as our design review committee in town. And at that point, if you're ready for a selection, in conjunction with that selection, we ask for design development plan funding, which is something we had discussed during the budget process, and we had a fairly firm commitment that upon selection of a site, we would be able to get those funds.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much. This is great. Rich took all the comments from our public hearing, which were really well received, and we met with the architect and we met with town staff to say, okay, what given all the factors of wetlands issues, cost, uncertainty as to future revenues. We talked about the Hartford earlier. What makes sense? And when we talked to town staff, they said what they really needed immediately was a new kitchen, and they really wanted to get a new kitchen rather than wait for years until the final design of a new or another building was constructed. So by phasing in this recommendation, we actually could get some of those needs addressed earlier. I think Rich did a great job at looking at the square footage of that's being used by SCTV, and by moving them out, we'd pick up some square feet without really costing us anything other than finding another home for them. And we'll work on trying to find out where they could go. I think it's exciting we could add the 17 spaces, even though we don't have the funds for the parking deck, so that would provide some additional concerns. And so I want to thank you, Rich. I know a lot of hard work went into looking at doing some immediate short-term fixes to the senior center to accommodate our seniors without spending a lot of money, without having a long time frame, and still allow us some flexibility if we find in a few years that the senior center is really taking off and we need to revisit some of these things. In discussions with staff, and maybe Rich can speak to this, if we were to build a new senior center somewhere else, we'd still have to do the new kitchen and fix the drop-offs for the town site anyway. So when we were looking at that, we said, well, why don't we just fix those issues that we know of right now and see if that buys us some time to accommodate some of the senior programs that we know are successful, which are the lunch programs, which have been phenomenal, and accommodating some of the other needs for fitness area. And that would give us some flexibility to look at the PAC site, which was endorsed by the Performing Arts Center, and addressing some needs. So thank you, Rich. Questions, comments?
Yeah. This phase, what kind of total square footage are you looking at possibly gaining? I know they were looking at, 20,000 square feet if it was a new facility, but how many?
Our full build-out, looking ahead to that maximum senior population, was about 22,000 square feet.
Right.
With SCTV moving out and some smaller additions, we can probably look in the vicinity of 8,000 square feet and meet the needs. It's kind of an exciting program because if you'll recall in the schematic planning, the way the additions were put on, it does lend itself to phasing in a program.
Yeah.
And then we could, we're into a little bit of a situation here about, if we build it, will a lot of folks come? And we don't know that exactly, so the phase program would allow us to address that. The kind of complementary addition at the Performing Arts Center also gives us a lot of flexibility in moving some of the other community activities out. One of the interesting things about Eno is that it actually has a fair amount of space, but some of the shared uses of that space prevents setting up rooms for permanent activities, and that's a bit of a disadvantage. You know, if you could have a permanent exercise room that was set up. There's 2 very nice conference rooms upstairs, the North and South Conference Room, but they're used for some town commission meetings, actually, some community groups. If those folks are relocated, one of those rooms, which interestingly enough, they were set up as offices, could be used as a quieter, more confidential social services office. And some of the smaller offices where they are now could be converted over to private health screening rooms. And that is one of a very popular and well-used program at Eno and at the other communities we looked at. So by shifting around the spaces, it gives us quite a bit of flexibility.
Okay. Just an additional question on the, with the retaining wall, in terms of what was put together schematically for the parking deck, does one sort of work nicely to transition into the next? And
it actually would, because that could serve as an outer wall in the future.
I think that would be extremely helpful from the business's perspective as well. I know
There's a lot of room back there. If you look at Eno's parking lot, there's kind of a nondescript grassy slope that goes down towards Railroad Street, and if you built a retaining wall out with a sidewalk, you could pick up spaces on the property.
Rich, you'd be able to get us some numbers as the next phase for that process.
Yeah, I think within a few days we'll get some responses from the state on the historic aspects of the building, and then we can put some numbers together. But I think we can get some good numbers. Like I said, the elimination of the deck is $1 million savings right off. And with the phased construction, it appears we would not have to relocate the main utility functions in that building, the electrical room, HVAC, and heat. So there's a few $100,000 savings there also.
Other questions? Comments?
Okay. I just had one more too, sorry, I know it's so late, but we approved those monies for the streetscape improvement and such, that was part of the budget. Would that make sense to do some of that if you were doing some of the access?
Now, one of the things that have been talked about with the access would be widening Station Street to two-way, and that is something we take a look at.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So for next time, we're going to hear some more refined numbers perhaps on some of these options, and then what the State Historic Commission
Yes.
Preservation Office has to say about this,
And
which will help shape our decision making.
Exactly. And if the board has any questions or the public has any questions before our next meeting, we'll take those into consideration in September as well. August is not a good time. People are on vacation. A lot of folks, so we made the decision not to do anything in August. So we're just putting it out there for more information, and then folks can comment on it in September. Lisa?
One of the questions from public audience, and this is probably for Mary Ann more than for you, was what does the cost translate to the average taxpayer? How much more taxes will they be paying for this?
What we're taking a look at right now is, with a phased program, exactly how it would fit into our debt limit program. Now, we have quite a few payments dropping out of that program, so with a staged program, I'm kind of just speculating now, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it could be nothing. If enough of the payments drop off, then we bring a phased program in.
It'd be great if we
We'll
could
get that
some numbers
information.
from Mary Ann.
Yep, we'll get that for September as well. Yep. Any other questions, comments? Thanks, Rich. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Okay. Finally, just appointments and resignations. We need to accept the resignation of David Fritas as a member of the Historic District Commission with our thanks.
I'll move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is to accept the resignation of Ken Fader, again, from the Historic District Commission with our thanks.
Move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is to approve the resignation of Derek Peterson as a regular member of the EDC with our thanks.
Move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next is to approve the appointment of Gary Dornbush as a regular member of the Economic Development Commission.
Move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes, regular meeting minutes, July 8th. Can I have a motion to approve?
Move that.
Second.
Any corrections, changes?
Lisa?
No.
Aye.
Do we have a motion in a second? Do we have any changes? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I abstained from that. I was not.
Thank you. Next item is personnel reports. Thanks to the Personnel Subcommittee for reviewing job descriptions and unaffiliated compensation, and thanks to our staff Tom and Sean and our staff and our employees for settling the final 2 contracts, the AFSCME contract and the dispatcher's contract, which will complete all of our contracts being settled, except for the pension reopener with the police. Why don't we do the job descriptions and unaffiliated compensation first, Lisa?
Okay. Do you mean the compensation framework?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the job descriptions, do you want to do those as well, or you're going to bring those forward?
Yeah, I have everything, I just can't find my agenda.
Oh, let's do the job descriptions and unaffiliated, job descriptions first.
Okay. We considered first the creation of the attached in your packets part-time tax clerk job description. This was done with Colleen's analysis and recommendation. Her job was to create 2 part-time positions that would enable her to have some flexibility. They found that having only 2 people in the tax office, it was not effective, because if one was at lunch or somebody had to go to lunch, they would end up having to close the office for an hour at a time. Having 3 enables them to use flexible scheduling to make sure it's manned more often. It also saves money in terms of pensions and benefits going to part-time. She did with the caveat that they weren't sure how this would work. It's sort of an experimental thing, so we may revisit it in a year if we see that it does not work as we hope it does. Right. But I want to give her credit for being creative and taking a look at the needs. And one of the things she mentioned is that so much now, the tax office can be done online, so it is not as labor-intensive as it used to be a few years ago. And Tom, I'll ask you to add to that.
Well, the other thing is that the 2 part-time positions will amount to a reduction in cost. It will, as neither of these positions will be eligible for pension or health care. So it is, to Lisa's point, this is an opportunity for us to try something different that should lead to better staffing. We go into it with something of an open mind, though. We have to be sure that it works, but I think it's definitely the right thing to try.
We did have the unanimous support from the Personnel Committee to recommend this.
Do you want to make a motion to approve the job descriptions for tax?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Go ahead.
Move that the full board accept the creation of the part-time tax collector and the accompanying job description.
Great. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Lisa.
The next thing,
So this is the
yeah.
report. I just want to note that was reviewed with the union as well.
Yes,
So
yes. All the job descriptions, we want to thank our union representatives because they did work with the town, being creative and flexible with us, so we are appreciative of that. The second thing we considered was to approve the proposed job description revisions for the position of the water pollution control facility supervisors. This was undertaken, we, obviously we're losing a wonderful town employee, but it was an opportunity to review the descriptions of the positions there and bring it up to date and make it more sustainable going forward. It's not an increase in salary, it's just a correction of things that really they've already been doing, just bringing it up to date. Tom, would you like to add?
Jim Clifton went over this very carefully with us, and so we've got a good handle on what the job descriptions are. Just for the record, it's going to be very hard to replace Jim Clifton. He's really, I think, sort of the dean of this kind of work in the state of Connecticut.
And I'll, if the board endorses, we'll send a letter from the Board of Selectmen thanking him for his service. He did a great job for us.
Really did.
He is going to be tough to replace.
I would say the WPCA gave him a nice little send-off with a aerial photo from the town of the facility, signed all around the frame. Yes.
I'm sure. Remember us fondly.
Yeah.
So would you like a motion to approve the job description, the WPCA job description?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the WPCA updated job description.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The last one, I believe we did. Am I right? No, we have got a couple more. The next one we did was to approve the proposed job description revisions for the position of Head of Adult Services, and that is at the library. Again, we had a retirement that enabled the new library director and the library board to take a look at the positions and update the position to bring it more in line with current technology and needs at the library.
Yeah, it's great. And we have a new director, and now the director's going to be able to hire the next position, which I think is a great opportunity. So thank you for doing that. Do we have a motion?
So I'll move that we accept the updated and revised job description for the head of adult services at the library.
Great. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, one more. Then we had heard from Hiram Peck, who, again, because of another retirement, or not vacancy, they took an opportunity to look at the structure in the planning department and made recommendations and changes to make it more efficient. They came up with a chart where they transferred, some of the others were updating job positions, but this involves some transfer of responsibilities, which is in the chart that you have in your packet. And the net savings actually will be about $2,000 to the town in making these changes. And I want to give Hiram Peck a tremendous amount of credit, because this was a very complicated look at his department, trying to make it more efficient and work in a way that will be more compatible for the people who are there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa.
And the other part of it, I think, also is that there'll be one person designated now as the code enforcement officer.
Yeah.
So that person will be hired with the expectation that they're going to have to do.
I think that'll be helpful, because I think it's frustrating. The process is frustrating because there's so much to follow, but then if you're the neighbor and you're following a complaint, you know, it's nice to know what the process will be and have one person to talk to. So I think those are good recommendations.
And it adjusts the expectations. They found that when two people were doing it, it was harder to get used to it is probably one of the toughest jobs in town hall. And so putting it all in one person with the expectation that this is what you're walking into, we thought would help.
And so I'll make a motion that we approve the description.
All right, then.
Thank you.
Of the code compliance officer.
Great.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Approval for the other changes?
Yeah, to endorse the other changes, we have to write the job descriptions, but if the board's comfortable, authorization to go forward and draft the job descriptions will be helpful.
Revise the job
Yeah.
description based on the proposed transfer of duties represented in the framework.
That is the motion I'm making.
Great. Second? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you very much. Next item is the contracts.
Do you want to do unaffiliated?
Oh, okay. Why don't you do unaffiliated?
The other thing we looked at was the culmination of basically 3 years of work. As you know, the Personnel Subcommittee has been working on a number of things. One is looking at a merit-based system to evaluate town employees, 2 market reference ranges. So we want to say, okay, what do other towns, what's a reasonable amount to pay our employees? Because we want to be fair and to them, and also it affects our retention and recruitment ability. So that's the other thing we looked at. And then we also, as you know, are conscious of pension obligations, and so we look at payment in lieu of payments. I want to mention that all our unaffiliateds do not get step increases like our unions, so they are at a slightly different thing. The other point I want to make is you are not included in any of this.
No, I'll just state for the record that I asked that the first selectman salary not be included in this, and that we take a look at the job description based on the charter changes to decide how we want to go forward.
And we did come up with a motion on that, so I'll get to that in a second.
Just wanted to state for the record that we have frozen the salary of the first selectman at my request over the last 5 years, and I'll be happy to provide the history of the position for the Personnel Subcommittee to
That would be great.
consider.
As we move forward, that would be wonderful. So the other point I want to make is that although this does contain a merit component and an evaluation, that is not the purview of the Personnel Subcommittee. We don't engage with the town employees and evaluate how they're doing. That is done by the First Selectman's office, as you as Personnel Director, and through your town staff with Mr. Cook and Mr. Kimball. So, but the personnel just was asked to approve the structure of it. But no names are associated with it. We don't know who's getting a high ranking, who's getting a low. That's beyond our purview and not something that we do. So staff should not feel like the Personnel Subcommittee is looking at and evaluating their work. That's for
And we will provide that information once it's decided for the board.
Yeah, and what we did, if you look at this, and I'll ask Tom to step in a second, because it is new. But we basically said, we took a look at market reference range. So if you're low in your market reference range, you might get a higher increase in salary and a lower payment in lieu of cash. But if you are at the high end of your market reference range, in other words, very near the top of the salary that the range permits, you would get a lower salary increase, but a slightly higher payment in lieu of cash in lieu of salary increase. And the idea there was, we want to reward just because someone's at the top of the thing, but we can't go beyond the market range because that takes us out of what is reasonably paid for the same position in other towns. So that was sort of the overarching themes to it. One of the things we did make a change on, and it actually was a difficult decision for us. One of the things that is being recommended is that for all unaffiliated is that they increase their OPEB contribution to 0.5% to put that more in line with what the unions have contributed. And so we took that into account as we considered salary and payment in lieu, because we know that this is going to be an impact on their bottom line. So that's why instead of 2, you may see 2.5, because that takes into account the additional contribution. The one area, and I'll ask Moira and Shannon to come in this, that we had a problem with was the, for the lowest ranking, we were concerned that giving a 1% cash component, or for the medium range, 0.5 cash versus salary component, or at the high range, just a 0.5 cash component. We were concerned that it's difficult for taxpayers to say, well, why are we rewarding those who are coming in very low performances? And Mr. Cook made the point, which I think is valid. It's true, in any other year you might come in at 0 there, but we are actually asking them to come in at a 0.5 contribution. So if we gave them a 0, they would actually be losing salary. And we weren't sure that we wanted to recommend that someone lose salary for the lowest ranking, but we wanted to bring that to your attention because it is an issue that we had long discussions, and I think we all had concerns about, and we would certainly welcome the full board's discussion on that aspect. But that was the one change that we had considered. We actually considered going to Mr. Cook and saying, okay, you can consider a range of, first of all, take off all salary components there in that situation of the lowest ranking, but you could do a 0 to 0.5 depending on if there's increased contributions to OPEB or pension, or if perhaps there's an unusual situation where the person just started very recently and just needs a couple months to catch up.
Sort of a mitigating factors approach, that this is not poor performance, perhaps learning curve, but that would be, I think, sort of the exception to the rule. I think the concern was.
But the expectation that it would be 0 unless there were an extraordinary circumstance like a 0.5 increase to the OPEB would be a mitigating circumstance to avoid them having a decrease in salary. But if this board feels a low ranking is deserving of a decrease in salary, we'd certainly like to hear your opinion on that. Our bottom line was, let's not increase them if they get a low ranking, but we did not go the next step, let's decrease salary with the lowest ranking. But we would obviously be willing to hear your comments on that. This is something that was a hard discussion, I think, that we had all night.
Great. Thank you. Questions?
So really what you're asking for is on the chart for not satisfactory, you're looking for 0.5 across the board for cash component.
0 to 0.5.
0 to 0.5
I think
to normalize the contributions so that nobody goes backwards. But
yes.
You also don't get rewarded for being a poor performer.
Right.
Correct.
I think 0 to 0.5 builds in flexibility.
That was the idea. But the expectation, we don't want taxpayer money going to reward poor performance, but we also don't want to take people, as Sean said, a step backwards either. If we get to the point where there's poor performance over time, we'll make a change.
Well, poor performance over time is dealt with in a disciplinary manner anyway, so it'll be weeded out as opposed to...
It just gives flexibility and for extraordinary circumstances, but with the expectation that low rating means 0.
Right.
But we didn't want them to go backwards, but because of the OPEB contribution, that would be a 0.5 backwards. So that's why we came to that conclusion.
Thank you.
Does
Any
anyone-
questions? Any
And this is just for this year, right? So obviously
Correct.
we'll revisit that next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Can we have a motion to approve?
Yes.
Can you do it with the 0 to 0.5?
Yes, I'm just kidding.
Okay, with the 0 to 0.5 cash component change in the number 1 performance ranking across the board.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the second thing we did is propose benefit changes for full-time unaffiliated employees hired after August 12, 2013. This was much easier for us. And that is for new hires, health insurance premium payments of 20%, contribution to the OPEB trust for other post-employment benefits equal to 2% of base wages. And again, this is sort of getting us in line with our negotiated unions.
Do you want a motion to approve?
I'm not done.
Oh,
Let me get through it.
Roll it out.
Participation in the defined benefit plan with a 7% contribution or participation in a defined contribution plan with the town matching up to 6% of the employee contribution. The town contribution would vest over a rolling 5-year period, which is standard as it was explained to us by, and this is again in line with the union negotiations. Yes.
Excellent.
Before we make a motion, is this an opportunity before us to really start to move away from defined benefit plans entirely?
It absolutely is. The recommendation was not to do that because in our unions, we made it a defined contribution option, and both Sean and Tom recommended to us that to switch entirely to the defined contribution thing would affect recruitment and possibly retention, and having looked at comparison towns. So that's why, but they do, there is a carrot in here because we hope that it will be more attractive to do the defined contribution, and it's also more portable. We're finding, I think Moira made the point that most employees stay at their current job about 3 years, and they like the portability. So we wanted to give the option, and it's in line with our union negotiations. Yeah.
I agree with you there. My only challenge is, Lisa, a couple of things. One, somebody's got to go first. There's got to be some agreement somewhere where we don't have a DB plan going forward. I mean, the private sector went there 15 years ago, 20 years ago. The other thing is while I agree with you, this doesn't have any impact for anybody that's currently here. So retention at this point isn't a concern, but going forward, obviously, I get that from a long-term standpoint. The other piece of it is the plan is a 5-year rolling basis. So folks only staying here 3 years, they're not going to invest in the defined contribution plan because they're not going to be fully vested for those 3 years. So it's a 1-year vest and it rolls, right?
You have to be,
It's going to be 20%, then you get the next 40 and
Right.
20, so it's actually pretty.
but you have to be with the town 5 years.
But
to
if
get the plan.
everybody leaves after 3 years, you're not getting your full vest. So
That's
again,
true.
That's
you're less incentivized to go with the defined contribution group if you are going to hear less. So
Part of it is to, with the 2% base wage contribution for OPEB, it provides folks with a little bit more flexibility in terms of how much of their disposable income they want to use. I do think there's a retention factor. The other thing is I think the theory behind the 7% contribution was really to continue to continue the DB plan as a viable option here. It is a good. There are a lot of people who find that to be a very attractive offering.
I know, I don't want that to go away.
That's well, and they've gone away in a lot of places because of for wide variety.
Previous agenda items, yeah.
Right, but I think when we looked at the Hooker and Holcomb study, among other things, they were really talking about the goal of trying to, the primary goal of trying to equalize town and employee contributions. And
That was
that's
the top
7%.
priority that we pursued after we did the study. And in part because the Hooker and Holcomb study showed that we won't really see the benefit of the defined contribution plan until 30 years out. That's not to say we shouldn't do it, but because of that, Hooker and Holcomb did make the recommendation to you in the union negotiations that we focus more on the employee contributions.
I think I'd make a suggestion, and that is, that both the town and the Board of Ed need to look at defined contribution and defined benefit plans. I think that the pension
Absolutely.
subcommittee should look at it. What we're adopting is only for next year.
No, I'm trying to make a huge issue about it.
No, it is an important issue, and we have visited it, and we need to. But I think at this point, to offer non-union employees less than what you've offered other employees sends a signal that, the recruitment for department directors and department heads are getting less benefits is not the signal we want to send. I mean, I think that we're trying to do this in lockstep so that it's a fairness issue. I think that it does pose a problem. But again, if the board, I think this is a good item. We have the time. If we adopt the recommendations of the Personnel Subcommittee tonight, we have the year to look at the defined benefit plans and how we implement those, both on the Board of Ed side and the town side. Because I don't think it really makes a lot of sense to do it piecemeal.
Right.
The town,
Agreed.
we've been doing, we have OPEB on the town side, there's no OPEB on the Board of Ed side. So we can't really, we're such a tiny part of the budget that if we're going to do all managers the same, we should all lockstep move them the same.
I agree, and just a couple of pieces, just for consideration for the pension subcommittee. I think we need to look at it with the personnel subcommittee in terms of compensation, because in order to make it fair, there should be more compensation that goes with it, because it's a different way of compensating folks.
Exactly. No, it's a good point.
I mean, additionally, again, somebody has to go first at some point, especially when we renegotiate with the unions later on.
No, absolutely.
And the third piece is budget predictability, which I agree with the Hookham and Holker study. The problem is it's 30 years every year we don't do it. So it's always going to be 30 years.
Yeah,
so
and that the arc varies, there's not the certainty.
Right, and the other piece of it is they don't get paid anymore once we do this, because we don't need actuarial studies at some point. So keep that in mind.
Well, I think we've come a long way from, 6 years ago, we increased
Yes.
the pension we increased the pension payment.
We're doing a good job.
So
No
I
knocking
think
that.
we're come a long way from
Absolutely.
not increasing pension benefits by 25%, but
With that, I recommend that we approve as
amended.
As noted here.
As adopted. Okay.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then I have one more, and then we're done. The other thing the Personnel Subcommittee did is we recommended to this board that we go out to RFP to hire a consultant to look at the option permitted by the charter, and I think this came at your suggestion, that we look at the responsibilities and salary of the first selectman's office should a first selectman opt to invoke that part of the charter option. And we thought, we did this through the engineering department, and that was about $5,000, so we don't know. Less than that. So we thought it was an affordable thing. It was good to begin that process, since we just did the charter revision, and sort of look at shifting the responsibilities of personnel director maybe to someone who is more embedded in the bureaucracy, I guess, for lack of a better word, but in town hall. And Moira made the point, the personnel subcommittee doesn't look at it in part because that would not be, I think, appropriate, because the political appointees, we don't want town staff feeling that they're at the whim of the voters on merit. And then should we shift some of the personnel things, and that was done at your suggestion, so I want to thank you for that initiative.
And just for the record, this would take effect after the next term of the first selectman, so anyone who's interested in being first selectman, who may be running for selectman, can vote on this motion, because it would not affect
that term.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay.
I think that's fair, because again, we need to do it now.
Yeah, no, it
with
makes sense.
No respect to whoever it's
The
going to
charter
be.
change is a good opportunity. That's why I suggested we do it. I think this is the right time. We're evolving as we go toward professional management, and charter revision. People of Simsbury have spoken, so let's implement it.
So just to be clear, there's something that's going to come back from a contractual standpoint in terms of what we're actually putting out in terms of the scope of work, so we're
I
looking
think
at
the
the job
scope
description.
of work will go back to personal subcommittee.
Okay. Right.
And we'll ask the personal subcommittee to guide that process.
Okay.
And then if they want to bring it forward, if they need board approval, they'll bring it back to the full board.
We'll bring it to the full board for the RFP approval,
Right.
just to make sure the full board is on board with what we're looking for.
Sounds good.
It's on board with the board.
So we have a motion?
Yes.
We have a second?
Second.
The motion was to approve the funding.
To approve going out to RFP for a consultant to evaluate.
Clerk wants to
to
just
coming back
clarify the
here.
motion.
Okay.
And Maura made the motion?
Yes.
And Sean seconded it?
And that's provided it's subject to it coming back here as
Yes,
stipulated by
that's
Lisa.
what it was represented.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to contract.
Oh, I forgot about
ratification.
that.
Two more. And then if anyone can hold their liaison reports till next meeting?
Absolutely.
Great. So last two items on our agenda. And again, thanks, Tom, to you, Sean, town council, our staff, for getting all these contracts settled. I think our employees do a great job for the town, and we wanted to settle these contracts so that they can know we value them, even though, we're really bound by our financial conditions. So I don't know, kind of want to go quickly through the settlements?
I think you'll see that there's a lot, these have a lot of settlements that preceded them. There are, one actually positive difference is that both the AFSCME unit, which is about 44 employees in the Parks and Rec and the Water Pollution Control and Public Works, both the AFSCME unit and our dispatchers unit have agreed to introduction of a high deductible health care plan with a health savings account as well, which, as I understand it, will help us with the introduction of the new federal health legislation, but it also gives us another option, another plan design in our arsenal, and it's for some people to work very well and should save everybody money. Really, I think you'll see that once again we have wage increases of 2%. The one aberration is the 2.25% for the last year of the AFSCME contract. For both contracts, there are OPEB contributions, there are pension contributions, the same new hire options that we described, some minor differences, but I outlined those in your submission forms. The wellness program is in place with everybody. All in all, I think these are very, very solid contracts. Managed to reach agreement with the AFSCME unit after 2 mediation sessions. It was pretty tense for most of that. Final thing is that with the dispatchers, we had to address something of a disparity in their wages with respect to their competitors. It's big. If you look at the other towns in the area, almost all of them are paying on the order of $10,000 more at the highest step for dispatchers who do a lot less than ours and with a lot more staffing. So the answer to that was to build in some additional steps that over time will get them to median or a little bit better.
Thanks, Tom. I think it's a very fair contract. We want to make sure our employees are compensated, but at the same time, that this is the first time there's been an OPEB contribution, which will reduce the town's costs for health benefits, and the first time there's a defined contribution plan, and the first time town has a formal wellness program, which will keep our employees healthy, at the same time reduce the cost of the town. So it's a great contract for both, so thank you. Question?
One question, I agree. Fantastic job as on the rest of them. On the AFSCME contract, second page, section 7, down in pension contribution, you note a range from 2 to 5%, but it only goes up to 4.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Sean. That is one significant difference is that AFSCME was not, most of the CSEA contracts and the dispatcher contracts actually have contributions that go beyond the term of the contract.
Okay.
That was not something I was able to obtain at mediation with AFSCME.
Gotcha. Okay.
Other question?
Is there, with the HSA, any contributions from the town side that go into that, or is that fully employee funded?
No, there will be contributions from the town side. Now, both of those have been negotiated so that the terms of setting up the HSA remain with us.
Okay.
So I think, the goal will be to do something that provides some incentive for people to participate in them, of course. And we had a couple of bids in for a couple of years ago now from Connecticut, so we have some models to work with.
Is that it's a rollover year to year?
Yes, correct.
And if they were to leave, can they take that with them?
Yes, they can. It is their money.
Okay.
And I know the town's been trying to get this HSA in for a long time. This is the first time we've been able to get it.
So many folks are moving towards them.
I know,
Public
it's
rec,
great.
yeah.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So at this point, can we have a motion to approve the AFSCME contract for a period covering July 1st, 2011 to June 30th, 2016?
I'll make that motion.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is to approve the tentative agreement. And again, for the record, both these contracts have been ratified by the respective unions, so they come to the board already ratified. Second is to approve the tentative agreement for contract local 222, CILU, CIPU, local 41, dispatchers union for the same period of July 1st, 2011 to June 30th, 2016.
Move that.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. That's great. At this point, can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much. I know it was a long night, but we got a lot done.
Marathon.
Good stuff. Yeah. Earned it tonight.
Right.
Sean,
Right
you
in
could
the
probably
airport,
still
John?
get
Yes,
6
ma'am.
hours
That
of
would be
sleep
wonderful
in.
if you do that.
So like if I order pizza Saturday night, I can eat it tonight, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
I'm sorry.